Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I'm still teaching, though not at the same school anymore. Since this story involves young children, I'll keep some details vague for their privacy. This happened when I was teaching second grade at Roosevelt Elementary in Riverside, California, back in 1992. It was a public school in a working-class neighborhood near San Bernardino. And looking back now, after hearing similar stories from other teachers, I realize how common these incidents were in the 90s. My problem started one morning during recess. I was supervising the kids on the playground when one of my students, a quiet little girl named Emma, approached me with the strangest question. "Mrs. Peterson, your uncle cries a lot, doesn't he? He misses you so much." I crouched down to her level, speaking gently as I always did with my students. "Which uncle, sweetie? I don't understand." "Uncle Robert," she said matter-of-factly. "He cries because he says he can't see you anymore." My blood ran cold. My Uncle Robert had passed away just 4 months earlier. We'd been incredibly close. He was my favorite uncle, but I'd never mentioned his death at school. Maybe 1 or 2 fellow teachers knew, but certainly none of my students. Trying to keep my voice steady, I asked Emma how she knew about my uncle, how she even knew his name. "He talks to us during recess," she said simply. This confused me even more. None of the kids had cell phones back then. This was 1992, after all. And what would my uncle have to do with anything? Emma took my hand and led me across the playground. I'd noticed a group of kids playing in a circle near the small amphitheater, sitting on the ground. From a distance, I'd assumed they were playing marbles or some similar game. When we got closer, I saw 3 of my students and 1 third grader sitting around a Ouija board on the asphalt. I didn't get a chance to see if the planchette was moving or what exactly they were doing, because I immediately asked what they were up to and whose board it was. They looked up, laughing, and pointed to Tommy, one of my quieter students. I'd never seen him take anything like that out of his backpack. Tommy looked embarrassed but confused about why I seemed upset. He told me it belonged to his older brother, that they were just playing with it. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "We've played twice before, and your uncle answers us. He was just here, but he went behind the amphitheater." The other children got excited, all talking at once. "Mrs. Peterson, yes, he came to see you. Your uncle is right over there." They jumped up and ran behind the small amphitheater structure. I followed them, keeping the group with the board in my sight. I watched as the kids who'd run off searched for my uncle, calling out to empty air. I confiscated the board and calmly explained that such things couldn't be brought to school, careful not to let them see how shaken I was or say anything that might frighten them. That's when one of the boys told me that my uncle talked to them, wrote messages on the board because he sounds like a broken speaker. He said Uncle Robert had told them his name, that I was his niece, that he missed me terribly. The child explained that my uncle cried a lot and didn't like being seen, which was why he'd hidden behind the amphitheater. The kids who'd gone looking came back disappointed. "We couldn't find your uncle, Mrs. Peterson, but he was just here. Maybe you'll see him later. He cries a lot, but he talks really weird and it's kind of scary." These children hadn't heard what the first group had told me, yet their description was identical. I told them all to go play, that I wouldn't punish them, but that toys like this needed my permission a day in advance. They apologized and ran off. The details they'd shared were impossible to dismiss as coincidence. My Uncle Robert had died of advanced throat cancer. He'd been a heavy smoker and drinker, not problematic, just severe habits that eventually cost him his voice. In his final 2 years, he could barely speak, and we used to tease him that he sounded like a broken microphone at a flea market. Uncle Robert had a dark sense of humor and encouraged these jokes, saying that if we could laugh about it, he didn't have to suffer as much. In his last months, he communicated through a notebook because speaking became too painful, and sometimes his voice gave out entirely. When I returned the board to Tommy's mother at pickup, her reaction confirmed my fears. I handed it to her in a black bag so other parents wouldn't see. She was shocked. She had no idea such a thing was in her house. I mentioned that Tommy said it belonged to his older brother and asked her to just be careful. She seemed bewildered, and we said goodbye. But then she hurried back to me with another disturbing question. Has there been a new janitor hired? Someone named Robert. Again trying to hide my alarm, I asked why. She explained that the day before, Tommy had come home from school talking about Mr. Robert, who spoke in a scary way that frightened him. I quickly invented a story about a maintenance worker who'd only been there that week and had a peculiar voice, knowing full well that our longtime janitor was named Frank and spoke perfectly normally. All the students knew Frank well. When I told my mother about everything that evening, she said Uncle Robert must have had a reason to come back and see me, maybe to say goodbye. Perhaps he couldn't find another way to communicate and took advantage of the children's Ouija board to let me know he was still with me, in his own way of saying farewell. My students never mentioned Uncle Robert again after that day. They say Ouija boards open portals, and many people originally used them hoping to communicate with deceased loved ones. But we've also heard stories suggesting that other entities, things that may never have had physical bodies, take advantage of these portals to communicate, interact, or even remain in our world. Have you heard anything similar? I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I was never drawn to supernatural things. Horror movies left me sleepless for days, so I avoided anything related to the paranormal. My husband enjoyed scary films, but never pressured me to watch them. He knew better. Everything changed when our daughter, let's call her Katie, turned 7. We hadn't noticed anything unusual until one night in March of 2000, when my husband shook me awake. "Honey, I can hear Katie outside." Groggily, I told him that was impossible. I'd tucked her into bed hours ago. He sat up, walked to our bedroom window, opened it, and suddenly bolted from the room. The urgency in his voice as he called Katie's name throughout the house jolted me fully awake. I grabbed my slippers and followed him to the back door. Through the glass, I watched in horror as my husband ran toward Katie, who sat in the middle of our backyard in complete darkness. It was 2 in the morning, and rain was falling steadily. She sat there, soaked, staring at the ground as if the rain didn't exist. I rushed to get a towel while my husband carried her inside, asking what she was doing out there. That's when I noticed what he held in his other hand, a Ouija board. We focused on drying Katie off and asking how she'd gotten outside. I'd reached my husband before he unlocked the patio door, which meant it had been secured from the inside. Yet somehow, our daughter had been sitting in the rain. When Katie saw us, she seemed to wake up and said she'd been talking to a lady. My husband and I exchanged worried glances. We told her no one was there, that she must have been dreaming. But Katie insisted that a lady had been speaking to her through that thing, pointing at the board in my husband's hands. She said the lady had helped her climb out through the kitchen window so they could talk better. The kitchen window, like all our windows, was protected by security bars. Even Katie, small as she was, couldn't have squeezed through. We checked every door. Both exit points were locked tight. We couldn't understand how she'd gotten outside. "Katie, sweetheart, did Aunt Marlene give you this board?" my husband asked. She nodded yes. This had happened exactly 1 week after Katie's birthday party, where several relatives had visited, including Marlene, my husband's sister. I'd never gotten along with Marlene, and she wasn't close to Katie either. Katie explained that Aunt Marlene had given her the board, but made her promise to hide it from us, to never tell us about her gift. She started crying, realizing she'd been keeping a secret. We'd always taught her to be honest with us. We assured her it wasn't her fault. Aunt Marlene had put her in an impossible position. Then we asked again what she'd been doing in the yard. Katie said Aunt Marlene had taught her how to use the board, describing it as a special telephone that let you talk to whoever answered, letter by letter. She'd presented it as a game, and Katie, being only 7, had believed her. "The tall lady got me out through the window, and we played in the yard," Katie said. Then she asked if we'd seen the lady too. My husband and I didn't know what to say. He suggested she might have been sleepwalking, explaining the concept to make it seem less frightening. But that didn't explain how she'd gotten outside. We took the board away, explaining that such things were dangerous, and that Aunt Marlene had been wrong to give it to her and ask her to lie to us. That's when Katie said something that made terrible sense. Though her voice had changed, she sounded scared now. "Is that why the lady looks like that? Aunt Marlene is afraid of her. I'm not, but she looks funny." "How does she look? Why do you think Aunt Marlene is afraid?" my husband asked. Katie told us that ever since she'd first spoken to the woman through the board, she'd started seeing her at the window. She said Aunt Marlene was terrified because the lady Carmen followed her everywhere. Aunt Marlene had called Carmen, but didn't want to see her anymore. The woman looked very tall and had a face full of smoke, but you could see her eyes. They were big and all white. Katie said it made her giggle. Then our 7-year-old asked if Aunt Marlene had given her the board because she couldn't stand Carmen anymore, because Carmen comes with the board. Hearing this from a child was incredible. How was she drawing these conclusions? Why did it seem like whoever she'd been talking to had told her everything? When we asked why Carmen had taken her outside that night, Katie said, "To meet me." She said she's not bad and wanted to tell me what Aunt Marlene did. But when you came, she wasn't there anymore. This conversation in our living room, while we dried our daughter off, was surreal. The whole time, I felt like we were being watched through the windows. Katie might have imagined everything, but that didn't explain how she'd gotten outside or why Marlene had given her that board. The next day, after dropping Katie at school, we returned the board to Marlene. When she opened her door and saw us holding the Ouija board, her face went white. "Here's your little toy," my husband said. "Don't come near our house or Katie again. And here you can deal with Carmen, who's pretty angry with you." I smiled at my sister-in-law as we walked away. I expected Marlene to slam the door or yell, but she just stood there frozen, clutching the board. We drove off, and she moved away within months. She never contacted us again. We learned years later that she died in Arizona. We never asked how. Thank God nothing else happened, but that was our first and last encounter with anything supernatural. Katie still has mixed feelings when we ask about that night. She remembers it clearly, remembers Carmen, and says that while the memory of how Carmen looked scares her now, she knew the entity wasn't evil. Carmen had spoken kindly to her, but Katie understands these aren't things to play with. What do you think happened? Why do you suppose Aunt Marlene summoned Carmen in the first place? Can you ask favors through these boards? These are questions that may never have complete answers. I have a short but strange experience that might seem like just a series of precise coincidences to some. But I'll let you decide what you think happened. I was living alone in Tucson, Arizona, in a small apartment near the university. I was 27 when this occurred, back in 2004. Some friends had come over for dinner one evening, and one of them brought a Ouija board. He pulled it out late in the night, after we'd been drinking and talking. We were all pretty tired by then, and never actually used it. My friends left in the early morning hours, but my friend Marcus accidentally left the board in my living room. I wasn't afraid of it at all, actually. I thought it was beautiful. It was dark mahogany with black letters, and looked like it had been varnished to give it an elegant shine. Marcus had told us he'd gotten it from a shop in Salem, Massachusetts, through a friend who specialized in such things. He claimed he'd used it several times before. The only thing he took with him was the planchette. So when I called to tell him he'd forgotten his board, he said that's why he had the pointer with him. He asked if I minded keeping it until the following weekend, and I said no problem. I left it in my living room. It actually complemented my daycare. Since I rarely had visitors during the week, I wasn't concerned about leaving it out. But then strange things started happening with my phone calls. First, my grandfather called one afternoon. Several times during our conversation, he'd stop mid-sentence and say, "Sorry, sweetheart, I didn't catch that. What did you say?" This happened when he was telling me stories, and I wasn't interrupting him at all. I'd tell him I hadn't said anything, that I was listening, and he'd apologize, saying he must have heard wrong. The next day, my friend Sarah called. She hadn't been at the dinner party. We were talking about some guy she was dating when I asked her a question about him. Instead of answering, she asked me something that made my skin crawl. "Veronica, is someone there with you? Your grandmother." I told her no, I was alone. "Why?" "It's just you're talking, and then suddenly it sounds like someone else is talking at the same time. It sounds like an old woman. Do you have 2 phones in your house? Maybe someone picked up an extension." I explained I only had 1 phone line. If my grandmother were here, she'd tell me to get off the phone. "Are you trying to scare me?" "Veronica, I swear I'm still hearing an old woman mumbling on the line. This is you trying to scare me, right? It sounds really creepy." I hope it's not your grandmother and she doesn't hear me saying this, but it's frightening. I was getting scared too. I wasn't lying. I was completely alone. I suggested we hang up, thinking maybe there was some kind of phone interference. This was 2004, when landlines were still common, and while I'd never experienced this before, it seemed like the logical explanation. Sarah said she'd call me back in 5 minutes after using the bathroom, but she never called back. I went about my day, went to the store, and ran into my Aunt Linda, who lived in the next neighborhood over. We chatted for a bit, and since we were close, she mentioned something that made my stomach drop. "Ronnie, I stopped by your grandparents' house this morning to drop off some things, and your grandfather told me something. He asked me not to tell you, but he looked so scared. He said that yesterday when you two talked on the phone while you were speaking. He could hear a woman from your end saying terrible things, cursing at him. He asked if you'd said something, but he knew it wasn't your voice. He didn't want to ask if someone was with you because he knew you lived alone. But this woman's voice, an older woman, kept cursing at him throughout the call. When I heard this, I told her about Sarah's similar experience. We both agreed it was probably just phone interference. Maybe someone was angry about getting crossed lines. But when I got home, I called Sarah to ask why she hadn't called back. She said she'd tried to call about 10 minutes after our conversation ended, but a woman had answered my phone. It was the same voice I'd heard during our call earlier, the old woman. She answered but didn't say anything at first, just coughed into the phone. When I asked for you, she started cursing and told me that Veronica was dead, then hung up. Sarah knew it wasn't true, but she was shaken because it was definitely the same strange voice she'd heard earlier, mumbling between curses. I checked my caller ID, and sure enough, Sarah's number showed she'd called when I was out. I looked at the Ouija board. It was the only explanation I could think of. I called Marcus immediately to come get it. After he picked it up, I made several test calls, and no one ever mentioned hearing another voice on my line again. For me, that confirmed it. I don't know if it makes sense to others, but even though we never actually played with the board, I'm convinced something came with it. Fortunately, whatever it was didn't stay in my house, and I'm grateful we didn't use it that night. Things might have gotten much worse. So I have to wonder, is it necessary to actually use a Ouija board to create some kind of connection or open a door? Or does it function as such simply by existing in a space? If you've experienced something similar, I'd love to hear about it. I've always been the quiet type, never good at small talk or making friends easily. At work, I do my part, follow orders, and keep my head down. I'm not the guy who speaks up in meetings or volunteers ideas. That introverted nature of mine, which I've always seen as a weakness, might have actually saved me from something truly terrifying. This happened back in 2003, when our construction crew got hired to renovate an old convent in downtown San Antonio, Texas. I can't say which one out of respect, but it was one of those places that had been home to nuns for generations. Some lived there permanently, while others came for training and left after completing their formation. The point is, there were always people around walking the halls, crossing the courtyard, coming and going at all hours. Most of the sisters were incredibly kind and welcoming. The vast majority, actually. Others were more reserved, but none were ever rude to us. However, one of the first instructions our foreman gave us, something the Mother Superior had recommended, was to keep to ourselves completely. We were told not to bother or disturb them in any way. We had to act as if we weren't even there, despite our presence being quite obvious. We couldn't interrupt their routine under any circumstances. Unless one of them specifically asked for our help with something like changing a water cooler or moving heavy furniture, we weren't to approach them directly. We had our own designated area with everything we needed, bathrooms, a place to eat lunch at different times from theirs, even our own water station. There was no reason to leave our work area, which was on the outskirts of the convent near the courtyard, in a small building that was being expanded. This was an easy rule for me to follow. I genuinely had no desire to interact with them because I wouldn't know what to talk about, especially since religion was never really my thing. However, one of the guys who joined us a few weeks later, a 21-year-old kid everyone called Frank, completely ignored this instruction. We all knew Frank well from previous jobs, and he'd use any excuse to chat with strangers. We didn't see anything wrong with it, really. It was just who he was. Frank genuinely enjoyed talking to people, and the nuns didn't seem to mind, so he never cared when our foreman called him out multiple times. The boss kept warning him that the Mother Superior had specifically asked that we not be seen by the abbess, but Frank said as long as the nuns didn't tell him to stop, he wouldn't be rude to them. If they wanted to chat, he'd listen. So they started giving Frank extra tasks to keep him busy, but he always found time to slip away and talk to them. Finally, one Friday afternoon, one of the project's supervisors came for his monthly visit. He was aware that Frank had been frequently chatting with the nuns, which was unusual enough to be noteworthy. We found out he knew because our foreman told us beforehand. Guys, the supervisor's coming later, and he knows Frank has been talking to the sisters a lot. Let's see if he doesn't get chewed out. When the supervisor arrived, he was never really a strict guy, actually got along well with everyone. He decided to take Frank on a walk around the entire convent. I imagine it was to discuss the situation. My other coworkers and I watched the scene unfold while we sat eating, speculating that they were clearly upset with him. When they returned, we were back to work, but Frank went to eat since his lengthy conversation with the supervisor had taken much longer than expected. Even we thought it was excessive. However, from the moment they came back, I noticed something different about Frank. I'd say that spark he had, that friendliness and charisma, was gone. He was very quiet, very serious, which made us think the scolding had affected him emotionally more than we'd anticipated. So we gave him space, and nobody brought up the subject. A day passed, and he and I were sent to buy some missing materials. I was a bit anxious because I had no idea what to talk to him about. We chatted occasionally, but I never liked awkward silences. What I didn't know was that it wouldn't be necessary for me to say anything, because as soon as we started the truck, he began asking me things about how I'd gotten into this job and whether I liked it, things we'd never discussed before. After about 10 minutes of what I considered superficial conversation, he asked me if I'd noticed the scolding they'd given him. I confessed that yes, I'd heard something about it, but he didn't seem to care. He wasn't interested in knowing if we thought badly of him or anything like that. Maybe because I would feel that way, I understood that he wanted to tell me something else, that this was a pretext to bring up that topic. And what he told me. He started telling me how the supervisor, while they were walking, had begun asking him questions in a somewhat sarcastic manner, as if neither of them knew it was meant to be a reprimand. However, Frank told me he responded to the sarcasm in the same way, to the point where the supervisor couldn't take it anymore and took him to the library. Once there, the supervisor led him to a section where they had various photographs. They looked at pictures hanging on the walls. Several were of the most influential sisters of that convent, and others showed complete generations of those who had been educated there. Then he took several of them and asked Frank for the names of some of the women who appeared in them, asking if he knew this one, then that one, since many were still serving there. Frank not only told him their names, but also remembered where some of them came from. He told me that one sister, for example, came from El Paso, that she used to be a seamstress before, that another had worked at a diner, at a factory, things like that. And he told all this to the supervisor. Frank said he noticed how the supervisor got annoyed and made a comment about how he'd had plenty of time to get to know them. Then he told me, "Elijah, I didn't want to anger the supervisor. The truth is, I did go too far. I shouldn't have disobeyed, but I also didn't want to act like I just came to work and therefore shouldn't talk to them occasionally out of politeness. I was doing it out of kindness." But while I was talking to him, he took other photographs and asked me for the names of others, or if I'd talked to them. I did recognize them. I had spoken with them. Maybe you guys even saw them too. Then from a desk, because you know the supervisor has some position here too. Maybe it's just filing or something since we were in an office. He showed me some folders with the same photographs. They were files, Elijah, with their names and their dates of death. Frank went quiet when he told me this. I was driving and asked him if he was serious about that. He told me that when the supervisor showed him that, he was left speechless, not understanding what he was trying to tell him. So the supervisor gave him the file to read, telling him that not all the nuns had been completely honest with him. He said the supervisor spoke as if it was normal for him to deal with these topics. According to him, several of them had failed to mention the small detail that they'd been dead for years. That's how he confessed to Frank, asking him not to tell us, that this was the main reason they didn't want us to interact with them. Because for the nuns, it's normal to know that some of their sisters are still there even when they've been deceased for years, at least in that convent. Frank told me that maybe they don't do it with bad intentions and just want to interact with someone else, but it really scared him a lot. The supervisor seemed to take pity on him and said he didn't want to scold him, just that he didn't want him or the rest of us to suddenly get a fright. Because a long time ago, one of the workers had gotten sick, because one of the nuns had disappeared right in front of him while they were talking. He'd had other incidents because of this issue, and although it had never happened to him personally, he'd heard many times that both the sisters and the workers, in the few times they came to do maintenance, would see nuns who shouldn't be there anymore. Even the sisters themselves had been frightened many times, but they were told there that they shouldn't be afraid of them, despite the fact that sometimes they would go to wake them up in their rooms, see them, and recognize them, knowing that the person they suddenly saw around the convent had been dead for years. That's why everyone, regardless of hierarchy, recommended that outsiders always pay attention to who they were talking to there. But then he told me that the supervisor had confided in him that he didn't know why. If they were in a sacred place like that, it wasn't possible for them to find rest. Why did they keep wandering around there if they prayed often for them? If supposedly they shouldn't be suffering, that they had no sins for which they should keep appearing in the convent? I didn't know what to say about this. I think even if I were good at connecting with others, I wouldn't have known. I simply patted him on the shoulder and told him that at least he could count on me, that he shouldn't be scared, that the good thing was that he didn't have a bad experience with any of them, that I knew it wasn't easy to tell something like that to just anyone, and that I really appreciated his trust. Frank, unlike how we were used to seeing him, looked somewhat dejected, and I understood it wasn't because of that scolding. After that day, we became very good friends. I learned from him how to open up a bit more with people, but it was very strange seeing the nuns around the convent. They all looked, how can I put it, alive, but I did notice that Frank no longer spent time with them beyond saying good morning. They would approach him from time to time, but Frank was no longer the one seeking them out, and he never stayed alone when some nuns came to chat with him. The topic of spirits wandering in sacred spaces, churches, convents, monasteries, temples, isn't something new. It never stops surprising us or generating more questions than answers, of course. But these stories always lead me to the same question. Why does this happen even in these places? Because sometimes, not like in this case, but we've heard of others where entities with bad intentions even appear in these places. How do they bypass the protection that's supposed to inhabit these environments? I'd appreciate it if my information isn't mentioned, as I wouldn't want this to reach the ears of the people involved for any reason. Although I use a pseudonym in the environment I work in, it's always better to be safe. I suppose as I narrate what happened, you'll be able to piece together the heart of the matter. However, for me, it was like putting together a puzzle. Since among everything that was happening around me, I couldn't concentrate on anything other than recovering. First, I'd like to give you some context. Besides my office job at a customer service center in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, one of those places I think many of us have ended up at some point, though thank God I no longer had to take calls. I also have my own business. I design, produce, and sell merchandise of different styles, focused mainly on the anime world. I offer my products online, and for some time now, I've been invited multiple times to set up at expositions or conventions of this type. For example, Phoenix Comic Con, Desert Dreams, Arizona, to name a few where I've gotten several spaces over time. These conventions are always packed, so despite it being very exhausting to attend these kinds of events, there's always a considerable profit that motivates me to continue. But as happens in other aspects, the competition can sometimes be very hostile. Although I try to be friendly with everyone, you don't always receive the same treatment. I mention this because there's a certain person who's considered one of the best in our field, to the point where this person already collaborates with companies and brands. I'm not trying to point anyone out. I won't say dates, whether it's a man, woman, or anything like that. Please don't misunderstand my story. However, I'd always heard terrible things about this person, and I noticed that most people excluded them. But I gave them the benefit of the doubt and would greet them occasionally, until they started approaching me more to congratulate me on my work, something that, regardless of who it comes from, is very much appreciated. They even gave me several things they sell, and in turn, I gave them some of mine to strengthen our relationship. All this happened in October 2 years ago. The convention would be the first weekend of November that year. But in mid-October, they wrote to me on Instagram to know if I would also attend the November convention. I confirmed that indeed I was already preparing things, custom orders. And apparently this person was excited to know we'd see each other again, which made me think I had a new friendship. The week before each of these events is usually very laborious, since my dedication is such that I stay up until dawn designing and buying merchandise. Sometimes I become so obsessed that I fall asleep on the living room couch where I organize everything, while my now husband sleeps peacefully in his bed. I barely rest there. Well, this happened to me that year. Right during that week, the one before, I started feeling more tired than usual. In fact, I went to see a doctor to avoid getting sick during that weekend. However, it was of little use since I felt less and less energy. So much so that by Wednesday of that week, I couldn't even start on my pending tasks because I would faint on the couch and couldn't get up. And when I say faint, I mean literally. If I woke up, I couldn't eat. I'd see food and feel repulsed by it. I went to see the doctor again, and while at the clinic, I didn't feel bad at all. They'd examined me and everything was fine, no matter how much I mentioned my discomfort. But I'd get home and feel like I was carrying a very heavy sack on my shoulders. And no, it wasn't from staying up late, in fact. Days before I had tried to go to sleep a bit earlier, because I noticed I was feeling worse and worse. The next day I didn't go to work. I had extra vacation days because I hadn't used them. The strange thing is that now I felt intense pain in my lower back, but since I was so exhausted, I didn't have the slightest strength to move to the bed. I'm telling you, I'd get home and always want to be lying down on that couch. I'd think about lying down on the bed, but something made me always want to be there, even though I didn't rest at all. When my husband returned from work, he helped me get up to go to the table to eat. He had to carry me. Now the pain was much more intense. At the clinic, they still couldn't find anything strange about me, so I'd probably have to cancel my participation in the convention. I was extremely depressed and called another colleague to take my place so it wouldn't go to waste. She was very surprised by my situation and visited me that same afternoon. So we made arrangements for her to attend, giving her the corresponding instructions, since my husband was the one accompanying me those days and was there with us, helping us coordinate. As soon as we finished that, we stayed chatting about other things while I made the effort to eat and not fall asleep, because I was nodding off from sleepiness, but wanted to distract myself from my discomfort. That's when my friend sat on the couch and instantly felt a prick and got up. She started examining the couch in detail, assuring us that there was something there that was making her uncomfortable. At first, for my husband and me, it was inappropriate for her to be moving the couch from side to side and also removing the cushions. But if it hadn't been for that, she wouldn't have found one of those pieces that my supposed new friend had given me. It was a keychain of a character that the same person had created from their brand, and it looked harmless. The thing is, I had never put that there. I had left it in the box from the last convention with the products I had left over. A box I still hadn't opened or reviewed since it was on my to-do list. My friend asked me what that was. I told her, of course. She also knows this person and understands the context, so she immediately told me that that gift had not only been malicious, but had brought with it a bad energy. Someone had put something in that keychain that sought to harm me. Not for nothing had it appeared out of nowhere and in such a mysterious way in that couch, when since I bought it, I never had any problem with it. We never even dropped anything between the folds or spaces. Why that, and why now? My friend asked me why I thought people said very bad things about that person. It wasn't for nothing. While we were going over that theory, at that very moment we were talking about that person, I received a message from them. I told my friend, "Look at that, speak of the devil." This person was asking me again if we would see each other the next day. I only told them about my discomfort, saying that no, it wouldn't be possible for me. The curious thing was that when they read that, they wrote to me very attentively, very kindly, more than usual. In our brief conversations, they had never spoken to me like that, which made everything more suspicious. Because suddenly now we had more closeness. Why were they so concerned now? The next day my husband took that keychain to a lady from his work who, he told me, knew about these topics and could possibly give us a recommendation to recover, and in those same topics, get rid of what they might have done to me. If it was the case that this thing was worked on, the lady confirmed it for us. On the other hand, my friend took all the merchandise I had taken out for that edition of the convention to sell it along with hers, together with my husband. So between them, they got my work moving forward. From that day on, I cut off all connection with that person, who approached me at another convention wanting to give me another thing without mentioning anything about why I had blocked them everywhere. I accepted their gift, but when I got home I burned it. It was another different keychain. I believed these things were more from other types of environments, but no, you even find envy of this type at conventions. Envy that involves witchcraft. My Uncle Marcus used to tell a story that still makes my skin crawl every time I remember it. The kind of thing you couldn't imagine even for a horror movie. Something that happened back in the 90s, a reflection of that strange, unsettling era. Though he was my uncle, I always called him by his first name, Marcus. He worked as a delivery driver for a sandwich shop that was just off Wilshire Boulevard, near where all those office buildings are in West LA. The same area also had residential streets, big, beautiful houses, tree-lined avenues that looked empty and dark at night, where all the wealthy people hid away early. All day, all afternoon, and all night there were plenty of orders to deliver, both for the office workers and the residents. Marcus delivered afternoons and nights. Back then there was no GPS, no apps. People called by phone, orders were written on paper, addresses were looked up on a huge map hanging on the wall of a small garage, and drivers had to memorize their way to find the address. Getting lost was normal. Taking forever was normal. One time he delivered to a house where no one was expecting him. Apparently he rang the doorbell several times, honked the motorcycle horn, knocked on the door. It took him a while to notice that a few steps to the right, someone had lowered a basket on a rope from above, from a window or balcony. The basket had a bill to pay for the order. When he saw it, he took the bill, put the bag with the food in, and before he could place the change, the rope went up. He shouted that they were missing their change, but the basket didn't come back down and he couldn't see anyone looking out. It was a tip of almost 100% of the order. Marcus left peacefully, went back to the restaurant, and forgot what had happened until another day when they called again from that same house. Exactly the same thing happened. In fact, this time he saw the basket in the air before he even arrived. He put the food bag in, took the money, and the basket quickly went up. The fifth time, the basket had no money. Inside was a set of keys. Since Marcus had started going to that house more often, he began thinking about the person who, by the way, he still hadn't seen face to face. He thought it must be someone elderly, someone who never goes out at all, who probably couldn't even go down the stairs anymore. Surely this time they need help, he thought. He took the keys and opened the front door, crossed a patio, and then reached another entrance. He tried several keys before he could open it. The house smelled like abandoned houses that remain sealed forever, of stagnant dust, of standing water. Marcus turned on the light because although there were large windows, nothing came in from outside. The curtains were closed and thick, like old velvet, almost black. It wasn't that light couldn't pass through. It seemed like it didn't want to. Everything was covered with white sheets, sofas, chairs, a large table. Under the sheets you could make out the shapes of antique, elegant furniture. Some seemed to still have plates and glasses on top, as if they had been left in the middle of a dinner. But the strangest thing wasn't that. There were glass display cases with plastic busts, the kind used for wigs, but arranged with an almost ceremonial order. Some busts had exaggerated hairstyles. Others were partially covered with mesh or ribbons, as if they were going to be made up or had already been used. In other display cases there were extremities, arms, hands, feet, all of different colors and textures. Some had marks, moles, hair simulated with precision. They looked real, as if they had been modeled from living people. There were crystal pedestals with glass eyes ordered by color. In wooden boxes with velvet lining were noses, ears, entire dentures, false eyelashes, eyebrows, an anatomical collection impossible to justify, like from a forbidden museum or a nameless obsession. Marcus went upstairs thinking about the person who lived in that house. What were they like? Why did they live among all that? What for? He reached the top floor knowing there was going to be something unique. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the first thing he saw was the basket and rope resting on the floor next to a window. Then a large room, messy but not dirty, as if it were used every day. In one corner, a metal bed with wheels, gray wrinkled sheets, a tray with food scraps. There were more display cases, more prosthetics, exaggerated eyelashes, fantasy makeup. In the middle of the room, near the bed, there was a carved wooden screen, a kind of folding panel that divides spaces, like the ones used in dressing rooms. This one hid the person who had ordered the food. Behind the screen you could hear their breathing. It was strong, labored, as if something weighed heavily inside or outside. "Hello," Marcus said in a low voice. A movement of things was heard, something fell, then footsteps. The person came out walking with difficulty. They were finishing adjusting something on their leg. It was a false leg. In fact, both were prosthetics. They were women's legs, turned, made of shiny plastic like from a store mannequin. Above, wrapping the torso, were old, poorly adjusted bandages. What protruded above didn't seem human. It was as if a creature had been forcibly introduced into a casing that imitated a woman's body. The flesh above, the organic part, wasn't human skin. It was something moist, fibrous, with exposed veins. The color was uncertain purplish in parts, translucent in others. It seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. That thing breathed through slits that opened and closed with a wet, irregular sound, like a drowning fish. The head was half hidden under a well-combed blonde wig, but underneath, instead of a face, there was a latex mask stuck with surgical tape. A painted, immobile mouth, 2 small holes for eyes. Marcus didn't know if he was seeing a woman disguised as another woman, or a creature trying to copy one. The person moved strangely, tried to smile, but it seemed like they had to concentrate on each muscle of their face to generate an expression. The arms were articulated like those of a high-quality antique doll, fine sections, simulating bones joined, with an internal system of taut wires and invisible springs. When they extended their arm, something in the elbow joint creaked softly, as if the gesture were calculated by a mechanism that had been in use for many years. The figure turned almost completely to take the money from the tray and handed it to Marcus. They didn't say thank you, not out of rudeness, but because there was no way to say it. The mask they presented themselves with, although cared for and delicately attached, had no opening in the mouth. It was a painted, immobile smile. Marcus tried to leave the change, but the figure made a small gesture with their head for him to take the entire bill. He left the room, walked toward the stairs, and went down a couple of steps. It was then that he realized he still had the keys. He went back to return them, and when he looked again, he saw something he hadn't seen before. The person had their chest open. It wasn't a wound. The entire torso was designed like a vertical mouth from edge to edge of the chest. There were ribs, flesh, plates, internal threads, filaments that moved like exposed vocal cords. It was a symmetrical, functional, living structure. An opening that breathed and beat as if it were the true mouth of that being. Marcus stopped dead, then left the keys on a small table nearby and lowered his head. He apologized quietly for having seen what he shouldn't have. He quickly went down the stairs, left the house, and made sure to close the doors properly. He got on the motorcycle thinking that now he was going to be afraid to go to that house. Very afraid. On the way to the restaurant, he also thought that person had invited him in so he would see them, so he would know them. Maybe so the only interaction they had from time to time would feel a little more personal. Marcus said about 3 weeks passed before he heard from that house and that person again. He even came to think he would never order again because they had felt embarrassed or even offended. But one day another order came and Marcus had to deliver it. Getting there, he got off the motorcycle, looked in the basket, and saw there was no money. There was a key like the other time and also a gun. Marcus stepped back the moment he felt a chill. He approached the motorcycle, looked up but couldn't see anyone, not even a shadow. The rope began to shake violently. From above, the person was rushing him. Marcus didn't want to go back in. He got on the motorcycle and started it. At that moment, from the window came a scream, not a scream of fear, but of desperation. And then from the same place where the rope entered, a bundle of bills came flying out, like $50,000 from back then. A small fortune. Marcus picked them up with trembling hands, put them in the bag, looked at the gun, looked at the keys, and went in immediately. "I'm not going to lie to you," he always said when he told this story. "The money, yes, I needed it, and yes, it motivated me. But I also felt curiosity and a pang in my heart. Why? What could that person be asking for with such desperation? Upon entering the property, he found the display cases empty. There were no more prosthetics, no wigs, no eyes, no hands, nothing. He went upstairs. He reached the bedroom he had visited even in dreams. The person was sitting in a chair wearing gala attire. A long dress, a perfectly combed blonde wig, blue glass eyes, a detailed porcelain face, an articulated mouth, legs with fishnet stockings and high-heeled shoes. When they spoke, the voice came out modulated, as if by a tiny speaker, soft but soulless. "Shoot me right here," they said, pointing with one hand toward their own chest. Marcus was trembling, couldn't even breathe properly. He didn't know if it was a game, a trap, or if that figure truly wanted to die. Marcus felt something he had never felt before. It wasn't empathy, it was deeper. It was as if for a few seconds he inhabited the same body, as if the rigidity of that false torso, that skin that didn't fit, that artificial voice, and that infinite fatigue settled in him. He felt what it was like to live in a borrowed body, a suit that squeezes, that doesn't let you move as you should, where every step is forced, where every gesture is a mechanical decision. He aimed the gun and fired. The person fell to the floor along with the chair. The impact was dry. It must have been a very light body. Upon hitting the floor, the plastic torso cracked and expelled a fine white powder like ash that rose like a cloud. A thread of smoke also came out, and a faint smell of burnt flesh. That being convulsed for about 10 seconds, the arms trembled. One leg hit the floor twice, and then it gradually calmed down until it remained completely still. Marcus left there, took the gun, took the keys. Before getting on the motorcycle, he put his hand in his jacket to check that he still had the money. Yes, everything was still there. All night he thought about what he had done. Why did he do it? Out of pity, out of fear, to obey. He also wondered what that thing had been. It wasn't human, that was clear. But then where had it come from? Was it a failed creation, a creature left behind, or maybe something that came to this world from another side? Marcus says his mind couldn't formulate a third option, that what he saw, that thing seemed to come from above or below, but never from the surface. That if it was from somewhere, it was from the depths we don't know or from the universe we don't understand. And it was desperate to look like us. It had all the resources, all the tools, but still something was missing. 2 months passed, and then something happened that he never would have imagined. They ordered from that house again. The 3 or 4 more times he had to go were the same. The basket came down with the exact money. Never again a key, never a message, just the food and the rope that went up in silence. The first half of this year was really rough. Tough times. My wife and I each have our day jobs, and at night we go out together on the motorcycle to deliver food. We leave the kids with my sister. I drive while Emma picks up the orders at restaurants and gets off to deliver them. We've organized ourselves this way since we started working together. As a couple, you can endure more. That night we were assigned to Franklin Street in an industrial zone, pure warehouses and factories. Industrial buildings with sheet metal gates and high fences. During the day it looks normal, but at night it changes. The street lights are scarce and half burnt out, and there are parts that look completely black. There you find those streets that smell of burnt oil, filled with cargo trucks parked in rows, some blocking the sidewalk, others with engines running. Since we picked up the food, we already knew where they were going to send us, a factory where we had delivered several times before. They always order delivery almost at closing time. Food for about 15 people, a grease bomb for someone working late. And although the place gives off bad vibes, the guy who always receives the order leaves a good tip, $20. I feel like it balances out. That time I left the motorcycle running while Emma got off with the bags. I was checking my phone, accepting another delivery so as not to waste time. When I felt her get on behind me, I started the motorcycle. I hadn't gone even 30 feet when I heard screaming, my wife's screams from behind, from the warehouse where we delivered, because she had stayed down there. I swear I turned around right away. I felt her get on. I felt the weight, her arm around me. I didn't imagine it. I went back to the spot and saw her. She was crying. Well, she was very strange, with her eyes wide open, scared or terrified, breathless. She couldn't speak. She looked at me as if she didn't know me, as if I were the one who had scared her, or worse, as if I weren't me. I got off the motorcycle with the backpack on, walked toward Emma, but she backed away as if she were really afraid of me. She covered her mouth, didn't stop looking at me as if I had something on me. I turned toward the factory. The man who always came out to receive the orders was there, standing with a serious face, crossing himself, doing it slowly as if he couldn't believe what he had just seen. I asked what had happened. No one answered me. I had seconds to understand it, or I was going to go crazy. Then I saw the square delivery backpack leaning on the ground. But if I felt mine was still hanging on my back, then it hit me. What was I carrying on my shoulders? What was it that I felt get on with me on the motorcycle? I felt around with my hands for the backpack strapped desperately. It wasn't straps, it was something else, something that was holding on to me, something that had climbed on top of me. I got it off by pushing, shaking with my whole body, screaming. It was like having a spider on your clothes, but multiplied by 100. When that thing fell to the ground, it moved on all fours. It had human shape, but thin, screwed up, like sick. Its hair covered its face, completely long, sticky. It made no sound. Sometimes it crawled. Emma, the man, and 2 more workers saw it too. No one dared to move. The creature went straight toward an oak tree that was in the back. It climbed the trunk effortlessly and disappeared among the leaves, as if it already knew the way. We said nothing. I got on the motorcycle. Emma got on behind me, now for real. We got out of there at full speed. That night we didn't work anymore. We went home trembling. My family is from Colorado. My grandfather was born and raised in Denver. We've all lived here forever. About 15 years ago, my grandfather met a lady and moved to one of those mountain towns in the Rockies. They have a restaurant there. They sell empanadas and Argentine-style cuts. My grandfather makes deliveries on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays until just before midnight. If they pay him the $15, $20, or $30 he charges to deliver the food, he'll deliver as far as Boulder or downtown Denver. Sometimes they call him from farther away, and he still goes. As I understand it, people who already know the food they make don't mind paying extra. I've tried them. They're honestly worth it. One day they ordered a package for 2 people at a house near Estes Park, pretty far out back then. The person who ordered was an elderly woman. When she was placing the order, she thanked him several times, said they had nothing at home to cook, that there was nothing open around there. Not only was there nothing open, there was nothing. The house was in the middle of the forest, although it wasn't really completely hidden or lost. In fact, it was near the highway, just without neighbors. That night, besides, the weather was ugly, very cold. The fog was coming down, like you were inside a cloud. When my grandfather arrived, the door was open. He knocked, and almost immediately the woman shouted for him to come in. Inside, there was a strange smell, like chemicals. My grandfather says when he got to the dining room, he got a scare that made him turn red with embarrassment. There in front of the table was a mummified person. The woman pointed to him as soon as she saw my grandfather's reaction. She told him, "That's my husband. Please don't make comments about his appearance." My grandfather apologized, but at the first opportunity he had, he looked again. And that's when he confirmed that yes, it was a dead man sitting at the table, serious, without a real gaze, with 2 marbles in his eyes, and in an uncomfortable position for someone who should be enjoying eternal rest. "Good evening." Obviously no one responded. The woman told him they hadn't eaten anything all day because she had hurt her foot. When my grandfather was leaving, the woman shouted that he was forgetting his tip. He turned around to go back for the money, and then he saw that the man was no longer at the table. Noise could be heard in the kitchen. It was the mummy taking some plates, my grandfather supposed. He waited a moment, as if to pretend to say goodbye, to see what was happening there. Then the husband came out walking unnaturally, stiffly. My grandfather looked away. It was a strange and uncomfortable moment. Now he was definitely leaving, but a loud bang on the floor made him jump. What else could it have been? It wasn't the plates. My grandfather turned around and saw the woman putting the guy back in his place, adjusting his head. That had been the bang. His head had come off and fallen to the floor. My grandfather obviously ran out of there. On the way to the business, he couldn't get the smell that permeated the entire house out of his head. Now he understood it was chemicals to preserve bodies. I've been delivering for DoorDash for about 2 years. I always tell my coworkers to send you their stories, but they always say they don't know how to write them. I hope someday they'll get them to you. I want to tell you that once, around 11 at night, I got an order to pick up at a restaurant I was just passing by. The order was almost ready. I waited less than a minute, picked it up, and went to deliver it. From that time on, I pay close attention to where they're going to send me. If it's a weird place, with all due respect, I cancel. I've been to really ugly places alone, dark, but none of those beats going to your ex's house. No joke, it's humiliating. It seemed humiliating to me, especially after when we broke up she told me, "Damn delivery boy, you'll never amount to anything." I realized when I was already arriving at her house, I knew where the app was going to take me. I was even happy because I already knew those neighborhoods very well. When I saw it was exactly the same address, my heart started beating really hard. When I parked outside, I got very nervous. I wasn't ready to see her again so soon. Screw it, I'll cancel it even if they charge me for it. Then the door opened and a woman came out. It clearly wasn't my ex, nor her mom. It was a girl I didn't know. Maybe a new friend of Kimberly's or her sister. I was kind of stunned for a moment, staring into nothing. The girl even asked me if I was okay to get me out of the trance. I quickly answered that I was just doing the math. I looked inside while she finished counting the cash. The lights were off. It seemed like she was alone. Mom's car wasn't where it always was. They must have gone out. I turned around, got on the motorcycle again, stayed staring into the void without starting it. And then I remembered a conversation I once heard at my ex's house. The house that was right in front of me. That time, her sister was talking on the phone in the living room, and we were in the dining room. If I remember correctly, Kimberly was distracted with some makeup that had arrived in the mail. I was quiet, listening to what her sister was saying. She told someone that she felt like someone else lived in their house, but someone who was hiding, who came out at night or when they weren't there. Because sometimes she found pizza boxes in the trash and didn't remember anyone in the house ordering them. Sometimes she smelled cigarette smoke, or like someone had lit a candle for just a few minutes. "Excuse me," I jumped at that. I felt the voice so close to my ear, almost inside my head. She told me she felt like she knew me but didn't know from where, that my voice seemed very familiar to her. I told her I knew Kimberly. She went completely mute, pale, immediately ran back to the house. It was the person who lived hidden there. That's why she knew my voice. I left there immediately after having that interaction. Later, I was thinking if it would be a good idea to call my ex to tell her. From what I knew, she already had a boyfriend, and honestly, I didn't want her to think I was calling to beg her. Anyway, I called her. She answered but didn't let me talk. She quickly told me that someone had attacked her sister, that she couldn't answer, and that it wasn't a good time. She immediately hung up. I don't know if it's still necessary to warn them that someone is hiding in their house, but from what I found out in the call, they already know, they already realized. They say the Chicago L is falling apart because of poor maintenance, corrupt administrations, and years of neglect. You could say that's partly true, but that's not the real problem. The deeper, harder to understand truth is that the subway doesn't follow human laws down there. Below ground, other laws rule, laws dictated by things that were buried centuries ago, laws marked by the energy of what existed before our time. Every tunnel, every station, every support beam feeds off the life of the people who pass through. It feeds on fear, on the blood that's been spilled on the tracks, on laughter, on sighs, on sweat, on the rush and worry of commuters. The subway isn't just concrete and steel. It's a living organism that breathes, that feels, that remembers. So every time you board an empty car, every time you walk through a dark tunnel, every time you feel like someone's watching you even when you're alone, remember, down here, we don't make the rules. My dad's younger brother, my Uncle Mike, voluntarily returned from Canada in 2018. He'd been living in Toronto, came back to Chicago. Originally from Michigan, he says the change in lifestyle, moving between those three places, was radical. He also says Chicago is the most terrifying place on earth. He wasn't exaggerating. He lived here for 2 months and couldn't take it, immediately went back to Michigan. He saw so many things in such a short time that, according to him, people here don't live, they survive. In 2 months, he witnessed a fatal car crash on the Dan Ryan, a violent police arrest downtown, a person who lost both hands playing with fireworks in Pilsen, and an armed robbery at a convenience store in broad daylight. But you know what was the last straw? The subway. He saw something on the L that made him think the best thing he could do was get out of this city immediately. Let me give you some quick context. My dad got him a job downtown, so to commute he used the Red Line, going from Fullerton to Howard. That afternoon it had been raining since early morning, and the storm had stayed all night. When it rains in the city, you know how it is. Water seeps into the stations, the walls sweat, the trains slow down, people get angry and desperate. The platforms were more crowded than usual. People anxiously watched the tunnel entrance. No train was coming. My uncle always carried something to read. We warned him not to be glued to his phone because someone might snatch it when he wasn't paying attention. I'm giving you the same advice, but not just because they might steal it. In this city, so many things happen in a single day that it's dangerous to lose sight of what's happening around you. Distraction can cost you more than a phone. My uncle wasn't on his phone like everyone else, but he was distracted. Unexpectedly, he felt a brush on his shoulder. It didn't completely pull him from his reading, but it did steal part of his attention. Moments later, he felt breathing right next to his ear, and then he did turn around. When my uncle told us about it at home, he stood behind me and spoke in my ear to imitate it. I swear it gave me chills. I felt exactly what he wanted us to feel, the discomfort of something that's too close, too out of place. He tried to step to the left to move away, but the man firmly grabbed his arm and returned him to his spot. "Excuse me, I don't want to make you uncomfortable," the man said, "but there's something that's bothering me." My uncle looked at him carefully. He was the image of any typical Chicagoan, neither poor nor rich, neither dirty nor clean, simple clothes, common face, someone you could forget a minute after seeing him. The guy told him he needed his help with something. He asked if he'd ever looked at a person on the street and wondered what their story was. What do they do for work? Where do they come from? What's their biggest secret? Have you ever imagined what the lives of people passing in front of you are like? My uncle hadn't said anything, just listened. He told us that at that moment he thought maybe it was just a weird guy, a sick person, or simply a crazy man looking for conversation. Nothing more. Then the man said, "Look at that person over there." He pointed to a man in his 40s, light brown skin, hair combed back, trimmed mustache, navy dress shirt, black backpack hanging from one shoulder. "He's a pervert. Look carefully at how he's holding his phone. He's using it to take pictures of the girl next to him." My uncle located the guy and then the girl. Indeed, that man seemed to be holding his phone at a suspicious angle. The trains would come and go, and he wouldn't get on, not until he got what he came for. Later, that guy will do two things with those photos. First, pleasure himself. Then share them in a WhatsApp group with men he doesn't know. My uncle stammered, wanted to laugh nervously to break the tension, but it wasn't something to laugh about. He ended up feeling even more uncomfortable. "Now look at that guy over there," the man said, pointing without the slightest shame. My uncle turned. "Look at his wife too. Look at her posture. She's afraid of him. She's afraid to say something that might upset him. He asks her things and she shrinks, hunches over as if she needs to become invisible. Look carefully. Do you see the bruise on her leg? He did that with his belt buckle. Look, did you see the buckle?" My uncle says that man had a way of speaking that got under your skin, convinced you whether you wanted it to or not. How could he know so much about people? These were things that suddenly became obvious, but that nobody takes the time to notice until someone points them out to you. And yes, the woman wasn't happy, that was evident. She had dead eyes, shoulders always on the defensive. She was a frightened little animal waiting for the next blow. The train was already taking too long. The atmosphere below was getting more tense. The damp platforms, the restless people, the air had thickened so much it felt like something was going to happen. "Look at that one over there," he whispered in his ear. "He's killed several animals, not from hunger, for fun." My uncle felt his skin crawl. "That woman," the man said, pointing to a lady in her 30s, red-dyed hair, long-sleeved blouse despite the heat, poisoned her parents. Her husband pressured her. He wanted them to live alone. Now they live alone. My uncle swallowed hard. Each thing he said seemed more horrible than the last. "That young man," the guy continued, pointing to a thin man with a cap, headphones hanging from his neck, "is a thief. He's a pickpocket, but he only works in the mornings. In the afternoon, he's someone else. In the afternoon, he's someone completely different." My uncle tried to break free, but the man squeezed him tighter, wouldn't let him go. His hand burned on his arm, strong, without tremor, firm. Then the guy took a step behind him, very slow, as if calculating every movement. It wasn't a simple sidestep, it was deliberate. As he passed behind my uncle, he pressed his whole body against him, shoulder to hip, without pretense. As if with that gesture he was trying to mark his territory, impose something more than fear on him. My uncle felt the uncomfortable contact, too close, too personal. His stomach turned. It was as if the guy enjoyed that situation, as if he liked provoking that sensation of repulsion and vulnerability. Then he planted himself to his left, almost shoulder to shoulder, so close he could smell his breath. That's when he dropped this on him. "And you came back from Toronto because you got a girl pregnant." We didn't know why Mike had come back. He never said. "If Grandpa had been alive, I swear he would have sent you back with a slap to go take responsibility." My uncle swallowed hard. His heart started racing. How did this man know so many things? Had she sent him? Someone who knew about his life. He started feeling paranoid, as if this whole scene, this whole interaction, had been set up for him. As if every person on that platform was part of a play staged just to break him. Then the guy asked him, "If you wanted to make this city a better place, which one of them would you start with?" My uncle didn't respond. "Choose one," the man insisted, squeezing his arm tighter. "The one with the phone, the one with the belt buckle, the woman, the pickpocket, the irresponsible father. Choose." At that moment, time stopped for my uncle. His head was spinning. He didn't know if he was dreaming, if he'd gone crazy, if the man was going to hurt him if he didn't say anything. "The one with the phone," he stammered, feeling there was no right answer. Then the guy let him go. He stood there next to him. He didn't speak again, didn't look at him, didn't explain anything. Silence. Silence for about 3 minutes. At that moment, finally, from the tunnel began to emerge that humid breath that always announces the train's arrival. First, it was a warm, sticky wind, then the distant creaking of the rails. The sound grew, filling the station. It was as if the tunnel was swallowing the air to vomit out that train. The man started moving away. He walked fast, then jogged. My uncle followed him with his eyes paralyzed. The train was entering the station. The man started running, and just before the train passed in front of him, he pushed the man with the backpack. I can't explain well what was seen, but what my uncle can't get out of his mind is how that impossible crunch of bones sounded. That brutal impact that kept echoing through the tunnels like a cursed echo. They evacuated everyone. My uncle was detained by several passengers. They pointed at him. He was talking to the killer. They interrogated him 6 times, subway personnel, police, ministerial agents. He told them all the same thing. The last one to interrogate him, a detective, told him something that left him frozen. "Don't worry, we're not going to press charges. You're not at fault. The person you interacted with, what you saw, well, they call him like an anonymous vigilante. It's not the first time he's done this. They're looking for him but never find him. He's someone who dedicates himself to investigating people, follows them, chooses his targets, and when he's sure, he acts. He does what he calls justice. He never talks to anyone, never gets involved, just observes and waits. But it seems this time, several cases came together, and you helped him decide." I remember when I was a kid, my mom and I got really scared. It was one of those things that stays with you even as time passes, even when you tell someone and they say you probably imagined it. No, it wasn't like that. It happened to us. We were coming from CVS downtown, loaded up with bags. Mom also had some bags of pastries from a little bakery on State Street. Those were the days. I still see that bakery and remember that afternoon. My mom didn't like taxis. She said they were unsafe and expensive. She always preferred the subway above all else. And honestly, if you know how to navigate it, it is efficient. That time it was Sunday, around 7 or 8 at night. There weren't many people. The subway at that hour takes on a different personality. I don't know if you feel it too, but the stations seem darker even though it's the same lighting as always. We got on at Washington and were heading to Roosevelt, where we'd transfer to the Blue Line. As soon as we sat down, we noticed there was a kid behind us. He was staring at us. He was alone. He must have been about 7, 8 at most. His clothes were dirty, his face too, eyes wide open. One of those kids that immediately makes you feel weird. You don't know whether to approach and help or just not get involved. He spoke to my mom. "Ma'am, can you give me my shoe?" My mom thought the boy had lost it. She looked for it on the floor, lifted the bag she was carrying, moved her feet around. The kid told her in a somewhat terrifying voice that she was sitting on it. My mom got up, and yes, there was a shoe, old, very worn. She picked it up, lifted it to give it to him, but when she turned around, the kid had also gotten up. He was coming toward our spot. Before reaching us, he used a voice that no longer sounded so much like a child's. "Can you put it on me? I don't have hands." When we looked at him carefully, indeed, he had no hands. His arms ended in rounded stumps. But what scared us wasn't that. It was that he had no feet either, and he wasn't walking. He was floating. I can't explain well how it was. It wasn't like he was flying. It was like he didn't weigh anything, like he was being dragged through the air like a balloon. My mom and I froze, immediately changed seats to other spots. Nobody else seemed to see him, or nobody wanted to see him. Just then we arrived at the station. We got up and got off as soon as the doors opened. We stayed on the platform like fools, trying to catch our breath. My mom squeezed my hand tight. I remember it was shaking. And then we heard a child's voice behind us say, "How scary, he had no feet." We turned around. It was another kid, not the same one. This one was smaller, couldn't have been even 5 years old. When we looked at him carefully, there was something wrong with him. He had a horrific hole in his stomach, about 8 inches across. You could see right through him. We froze. The kid didn't seem to notice his condition. He was smiling. At that moment, luckily for us, another train arrived. We got on, terrified and very quickly. To this day, my mom and I prefer not to use the subway on Sundays. My sister-in-law Sarah was in the middle of the platform at Union Station on the Blue Line, heading toward O'Hare. It was around 9 at night. While waiting for the train to arrive, she saw 2 young women arrive with an elderly lady holding her hands. The lady had her eyes bandaged. It wasn't a simple eye mask or a carelessly tied bandana. It was a proper bandage, like someone recovering from serious surgery. She couldn't see anything. Sarah understood that the lady had asked them for the favor. You could tell. When they left her there, the girls thanked her, said goodbye, and went up the stairs quickly, as if in a hurry. The lady was left standing next to my sister-in-law, alone. When the train arrived, Sarah approached to help her. She took her carefully by the arm, guided her, and they got on together. The car was half empty. My sister-in-law helped her sit down, and just as she was settling her in, she said without thinking, "Sit here." "Don't worry," the lady told her. "Actually, I can see. I see even better than you do." My sister-in-law froze. She didn't quite understand what she meant. "I can see that you're a good person. You're surrounded by people who love you, but also by a couple of people who have bad intentions toward you." That's when Sarah really went quiet, staring straight ahead. She'd never had contact with a psychic before. Without her asking anything, the lady gave her names, a neighbor and one of her friends. "Be careful with your friend," the lady told her, without my sister-in-law having asked anything. "That one you see as a sister, the one who gave you the red bracelet." My sister-in-law felt a chill because yes, it was her, the one who had given her that same bracelet she was wearing. And yes, that friend had been with her through the hardest times. She was the one who told them when you wouldn't be there. She told them which drawer you kept the money in, and she told them how to get in without setting off the store alarm. She didn't even do it out of necessity. She did it out of anger because she can't stand that you're doing better than her. If you look at her now, you'll notice that every time you tell her something good, she smiles but never looks you in the eyes. That's when my sister-in-law told me she felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water down her back. A year ago, $65,000 was stolen from her, and she'd never been able to explain how they got in. The door wasn't forced, and nothing else was missing from the store. She thought the best of her friend, and now this lady who didn't know her at all was telling her everything. And regarding your neighbor, he watches you when you think you're alone. He has a small hole, barely bigger than a quarter, between the dresser and the chest of drawers in your bedroom that are against the wall adjoining his. You haven't seen it because you never move that furniture. From there, he watches you. He watches you when you change, when you look through your drawers, when you put away things you don't want anyone to see. He sees you when you sit on the bed to read, when you go through old photos you keep in that blue box. He knows when you stay awake thinking about things you don't tell anyone. He's seen you cry. He's heard when you talk to yourself, when you sometimes ask yourself out loud why the things that happen to you happen. He sees you when you put perfume on your neck before going out, when you adjust your blouse in front of the mirror. He knows exactly what time you turn off the lights and what time you get up at night thinking everything is calm. But no, it's not calm. He's there. He's always been there. He's always been watching you. On more than one occasion, she added, he's crossed into your apartment without you knowing. He's done it while you sleep, and then he leaves, and you never find out. My sister-in-law was frozen. She told me that suddenly she could no longer hear the noise of the train, or the people, or the doors opening and closing. She felt an emptiness in her stomach. For a second, she felt like getting up and running out of the car, but she couldn't. She stayed there stiff, knuckles white, gripping the subway pole while the lady, so calm, spoke to her as if they were chatting about last night's thunderstorm. That woman was getting off at the next station. When the train started to break, my sister-in-law got up with her to help her get off. But the lady, with a calm that makes you more nervous than any scream, told her, "It's not necessary, honey. I can manage alone." My sister-in-law stood there, holding onto the pole, not knowing what to do. Just before the doors opened, the lady turned to her and said, "Honey, don't use this line anymore, at least not for a while. Something horrible is going to happen. Please take care of yourself." Having said that, she got off, walked slowly as if she knew perfectly where to step. My sister-in-law didn't know how to react. She didn't know whether to get off, follow her, ask her something, but the doors closed and the train started. 2 weeks later, the horrible accident at the Montrose station happened. The collapsed cars, the structure that came down, the images we all saw on TV that are still difficult to forget to this day. I hate to ruin the surprise, but I'm dying to tell you about the wooden clown that's been mentioned on this and other channels. I've seen it. I saw it at Jackson Station about 3 weeks ago. It was Friday around 10 at night. I was coming back from dropping off Jessica. We'd gone to the movies, then I went with her to buy a backpack, and from there I walked her home. When I was saying goodbye, she hit me with something that had been bothering her all day. She'd been thinking about something I'd said at the movies. I didn't even remember. The thing is, she started getting angry, wouldn't listen to me, slammed the door in my face. I called her 3 times, she didn't answer. Just as I was entering the subway, she called me back. I asked if I should come back so we could talk it out properly. She said no, that she'd gone out for a walk because she was really upset. We stayed on the call, me there at the station entrance. I don't know if this has happened to you, but when you've been on the phone for so long, standing in the same place, you don't know what to do with your body anymore. You start walking, pacing around the space like an idiot, not going anywhere. That's when I suddenly noticed something on the floor, a couple drops of blood. They looked fresh, just starting to dry. It wasn't like those old stains you sometimes see in stations. This was recent. I was still on the call with Jessica, or rather listening to her because she was venting and I didn't know what to say anymore. At the same time, I started following the drops. It wasn't just a couple of drops, it was a little path. Not a stream, more like a thread of blood. A trail you could follow only if you paid attention. It went this way, then crossed over there, went behind a column, passed by a newsstand, went down the stairs. Without realizing it, I was already inside the station following the trail. I moved direction, passed under the platforms. The call cut out there, I lost signal. Then it came back, but by that point, I honestly wasn't that focused on the argument anymore. I was more absorbed in that red path that was leading me through places I don't usually go. That's how I suddenly found myself at the other end of the transfer corridor, at the bottom of some stairs, in a very, very lonely space. The trail ended there, right where there was a door slightly ajar, a door that said employees only access. To go in or not to go in, I asked myself, standing there hesitating. Seconds before deciding, I hung up abruptly. I didn't even say goodbye. I couldn't explain to Jessica what I was seeing. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open with my hand. Inside, I found a solitary room painted cream color, that tone that already feels old by itself, like an abandoned hospital. The air was strange, felt denser than outside, and it was cold. There were a couple of desks pushed into corners, a bench against the wall, a shelf full of old papers, 2 lockers that didn't close properly anymore, and 3 chairs. In one of those chairs, someone was sitting. It was a wooden clown, very flashy. One of those with bright colors, clothing made with attention to detail. Face with that ear-to-ear smile but badly painted. Eyes very wide, very white. From far away, you could tell it was an object. But one of those objects that you don't know why they seem to have life, that you feel could move at any moment, that could suddenly jump on you. That thing was disturbingly still. And the blood ended right next to it. The path I had followed reached that point where there was a small, dense, dark red puddle. One of the clown's hands was loose, hanging from the side of the chair. The long wooden fingers pointed toward the floor, and from there drops kept falling. It wasn't paint. It was a thick liquid, looked exactly like real blood. When I saw the complete image, I felt afraid, fear caused by seeing something you don't understand. I turned around to leave, already with my body on alert. And just at that moment I saw it. The clown moved. Not all of it, just the hand that was resting on its legs. With that hand, it turned off the light. The room was left in semi-darkness. I can't explain the sensation. It was like someone had pulled a string in my stomach. I ran out immediately, went down the stairs almost jumping, walked quickly toward the platform, breathing with difficulty, out of breath. When I finally managed to catch my breath, the first thing I thought was, this is déjà vu. I've seen this clown before. For a moment I thought it was a dream, something I'd imagined before, but no, it wasn't that. I remembered this clown. You had already talked about it on your channel. Someone had seen it before. They said they saw it pull the emergency brake on a train car. You don't know how hard it is to keep something like this to yourself. I don't talk about it at home because my mom thinks differently. She relates everything to God or the devil. I don't think it's that simple. For me, all this is much more complex than we think. And here's proof of what I'm going to tell you. Maybe there's an explanation, sure. But if that explanation exists, it'll appear much later. Maybe when we better understand how things work down there in the subway system. This happened to me in 2017. I was working at Northbrook Court Mall in a clothing store. The schedules varied a lot, not because of the store's closing time, but because of everything you had to do afterward: cleaning, inventory, organizing, whatever came up. That time I got out around 11:30. I still had time to get home. I entered the station and had to wait a bit because of the hour. The platform was almost deserted. When the train came out, I boarded an empty car. In the whole train, maybe 10 people got on, no more, maybe less. Up to that point, everything was normal. The train's rhythm was the same as always, the stale air as usual. It wasn't cold or hot, just that feeling you get in cars when they're almost empty, the air weighs more. Suddenly, a hard break. Then it seemed like the generator shut off, also the air extractors, and finally the light. The speakers started emitting static, a buzzing that makes your hair stand on end. Then a distorted voice was heard. You couldn't understand anything. Then the lights came back, but dim. It wasn't the same intensity. It seemed like they were at 20%. You could barely make out things properly. The conductor, I suppose, should have said the service was suspended. But time passed, 20 minutes, and nothing happened. I got up from my seat. I was in the third-to-last car. I walked toward the connecting door. Through the little window, I saw people coming. I understood they were going to evacuate us. They opened both doors. The conductor came in with all the people he'd been gathering along the way. They came with confused faces, just like me. He led us toward the end. There he opened the cabin door, jumped from the train, and started helping us down with his flashlight in hand. He told us we'd walk back to the station, all together, walking slowly. It was during that journey that the worst thing happened to me. I don't know how, I don't know at what moment, but I started falling behind. I was in the middle of the group, but between being careful not to trip, between turning to see where I was stepping, I ended up alone. When I realized it, I could no longer see the conductor's flashlight and could no longer hear the other passengers' voices. Everything was darkness, total darkness. That's when panic set in. I started screaming, not loud screaming, scared screaming, screaming like someone who knows they won't get an answer. About 30 seconds passed that felt eternal, and then I heard a whistle. In the distance, I saw a light, a flashlight coming closer slowly. I was still pressed against the wall, trembling. When the light shone on me full, it blinded me for a second. It was the station guard. As soon as he saw me, he asked, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here alone?" They evacuated us from the train. He looked at me strangely and said, "From the train? What train? Do you see what time it is?" I looked at the watch on his wrist. It was 4 in the morning. He walked me to the exit. Along the way, he asked me more questions. He didn't believe what I told him, but he also didn't treat me like one of those people who go around stealing cable or doing weird things. To this day, I can't explain what happened. And look, many people think that when you tell something like this, it's because you imagined it, because you were tired, because you got carried away by suggestion. Maybe, perhaps, but I do believe that things like this happen a lot in the subway. Down there you don't see the sun, you don't know what time it is, you have no reference for anything. They're old tunnels, floors that millions of people have walked on, hallways that at certain hours seem endless. I believe that down there are things we don't understand, things that get trapped in the system, situations that repeat in loops, people who disappear, voices that nobody explains, trains that run when they shouldn't be running. And you go about your routine, your rush, without noticing, until one day it happens to you. Do you remember when pizza places used to guarantee delivery in 30 minutes or less? I do. It wasn't that long ago, but if you asked me, I couldn't tell you exactly when it changed. It just disappeared from all the restaurants, all the chains, at the same time. Let me tell you about something that happened last winter. I ordered a pizza because I was too lazy to cook. I had everything I needed from the grocery store sitting right there in my kitchen, but the afternoon had slipped away from me. I didn't even want to wash the dishes. In the end, it turned out worse for me. Hunger and impatience put me in a foul mood. The pizza was taking forever. I turned off the TV so I could hear if anyone knocked. Every few minutes, I'd peek out the window. Finally, I heard it first the engine, then I saw the motorcycle pull up. I didn't even let him park properly. I rushed out as soon as I saw him, before he could even pull out his phone. He wasn't exactly in front of my house, but I swear, for a moment I thought, I don't care if it's not my pizza, it's going to be my pizza. The delivery guy asked the logical question, "What name is the order under?" My voice trembled, I swear, because the box said Max, and I had ordered under the name John Martinez. Anyway, I had the strangest interaction. It occurred to me to just say Max. The guy looked at the box, nodded, and handed it to me. I was about to offer him money, but he told me the order was already paid for. Inside, I was celebrating. I thought, well, all that bad mood was worth it. The delivery guy was already turning the corner when I noticed something. Something important. The box didn't feel warm. It didn't weigh much either. I went inside, put it on the table, tried to open it, but it had a sticker firmly attached. I was there struggling with the seal when I heard a motorcycle horn. This time it really was Domino's. I ran out, paid, received my pizza, went back inside. I ate while watching TV, and for a good while forgot about what I had on the table. Later that night, I grabbed a knife, cut the seal, opened the box. Inside was a USB drive. I turned on the computer, turned off the light, and with a bit of fear, connected it. What if it's a virus? What if it's bitcoins? I connected it desperately, though now that I think about it, it was a stupid mistake. There were 3 folders. One was called The Recipe, another was named Urban Exploration, and the last one was The Vampire of Death Valley. The folders contained videos, 1 per folder. The first video was analog, probably recorded with one of those huge cameras that needed a tripod or a really strong shoulder. You could tell the year immediately without anyone saying it. Collapsed buildings, rubble, people helping however they could. September 1985. It lasted about 2 minutes. The first part looked like a documentary. There were shots from the street, others from buildings, and suddenly a cut. Now the city was at night. You could see what looked like a stadium or a large open space, dark. 2 people appeared, coming from behind the camera, walking toward the center of that space. You couldn't hear anything, but you could tell they were making a deal. There was an exchange. Something passed from one hand to another. Something passed from one bag to another. Within a few minutes, they returned, pushing those hand trucks, the kind used for cargo. 4 bundles per cart. You didn't need anyone to tell you what they were. The bodies were obvious from the dead weight, from the limbs hanging in all the wrong ways. They loaded them into an old van. The camera went up with them, and they drove off. That's where I got glued to the screen. This wasn't a short film or a film student's experiment. This was something real. Someone had intentionally documented a crime. Selling bodies is a crime, but what they did next, I couldn't have imagined it in my worst nightmare. They arrived at a warehouse. They removed the bags from the bundles. Yes, what you're imagining is exactly what it was. There was no need to focus clearly with what little you could see. Your mind filled in the gaps. They examined them, arranged them. I don't know if by size or age or something else I don't want to think about. Then they stripped them of their clothes and washed them. Pressure water, soap, brushes, like someone cleaning a pig heading to slaughter. I don't know if it was the temperature change or what, but then something happened that makes your skin crawl even if you don't believe in anything supernatural. The bodies moved. One sat up suddenly, another turned over, face down. Then you heard a woman's piercing scream. It was clear they were dead. What happened there has its scientific explanation, but it still leaves you frozen. After a while, when there were no more movements, when the warehouse returned to pure echo and the sound of boxes being dragged, a guy appeared. Then another guy appeared, the stereotype of a TV butcher. Tall, bald, big muscular arms, white apron stained red. Then the worst happened. They cut them up like you cut up chickens. You've seen that, and if not, your head has already put the image there. Believe me, it's worse like this. Thank God or whoever that they recorded that part with a fixed camera. No zooms, no creative shots, just an immobile frame. But that was enough. They took the pieces to another room, and there the horror continued, even if only in sound. Saws, machetes, and popular music in the background, as if it were any ordinary day. 30 minutes later, the camera only showed transparent plastic on the floor, accumulating a red puddle, the kind of image that never leaves your head. You could hear metal carts approaching. The sound of wheels echoed in the empty warehouse. They placed them right in front of the camera, which was now looking from above. The bags full of meat. There was no need for more close-ups. You understood immediately what it was. Someone with a thick marker started labeling them. Date and code. Among all the numbers and letters, a combination stood out that turned my stomach, a clear 19 and 85. They took the meat away, probably to refrigeration. When I thought there wouldn't be more, they returned with 6 large blue plastic boxes. Then something happened that left me confused. Several of them brought in an industrial machine, a heavy-duty shredder, yellow with a solid structure, top funnel and electric motor on the side. Like the ones used to shred concrete blocks or stone, but this one had another use today. The boxes contained bones, all the bones of the human body, clean, classified. One by one, they fed them through the funnel. The brutal machine began to work. The sound was unbearable through the computer speakers. Cracks, dry thuds, then a buzz as fine dust fell into industrial metal trays placed just below. At that moment, the most terrifying thing of this entire video appeared on screen. It wasn't the graphic images. It was the image of the person doing it all. At one point, he approached the camera, looked directly at me as if he knew that someday someone would see that tape, and said, "We're almost done." Why does that give me more fear than any violent act? Because it was the face of someone normal. Anyone. You, me, the neighbor. He wasn't a monster, he was an ordinary man. After the cut, the video showed another terrifying process up close. They were packaging that fine dust in metal cans, large cans like the ones that look like instant milk containers. A vacuum sealing machine closed each one hermetically. Each can was given a name and a date. My stomach was closing up. The violence, the coldness, but above all, the anticipation. What were they going to do with that? What comes next? The last thing you saw was how they arranged the cans on metal shelves. Then the 6 who had worked on the entire process appeared on camera, said goodbye, as if they had finished any work shift. I thought it was the end, but I saw the video's time bar. Half an hour was still left. The cut lasted just a few seconds, and suddenly the image quality improved tremendously. It was another camera, other equipment, and to leave no doubt about the date, a guy appeared on camera holding a newspaper that he brought close to the camera. August 2023. The camera followed him. He walked down a long hallway, entered a more modern, cleaner warehouse, advanced to the back of the building. There were the same dusty shelves, but loaded with the same cans, the cans that contained ground bones. The next shot appeared without transition. Suddenly, a kitchen, a huge kitchen, the kind you don't see at home but in factories or large bakeries. Yellow walls stained by time, metal racks to the ceiling, industrial mixers that looked like airplane engines, ovens that should be opened with thick gloves as a precaution. A bakery kitchen. Without ceremony, they emptied the contents of several cans into the bowl of a large mixer. The fine dust fell with a dry sound, like heavy sand. Then they started adding common ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt, a little sugar, lard. The process wasn't shown complete, but enough so you'd understand what they were doing. The mixer spun at low speed first, then faster. They formed the dough, divided it into portions, shaped it. The process of making bread rolls is simple: kneading, rolling, resting, cutting, baking. And that was exactly what they showed. From the oven came perfectly golden, crispy bread rolls, still giving off steam. That's where the video changed completely. What came next was edited much more professionally. It had rhythm, background music, well-composed shots. You saw fragments of people distributing bags of bread rolls. Some loaded them in backpacks, others in plastic boxes. They went through the city streets, delivered them to other people. The packages were quickly exhausted. Some were distant shots, others close-up. Sometimes from the sidewalk, sometimes almost at ground level. People receiving the bags, walking to their destinations. Then the camera changed from the other side of the street. Without hiding or pretending it was a hidden camera, they focused on a tamale stand. Metal table, white tablecloth, red umbrella, pot full of steam releasing intermittent jets. To one side, the bags of bread rolls. What followed were too many cuts, as if they wanted to hammer the idea into your head. Fragments of people buying, paying, biting their torta. The camera followed the hands carrying the bags, followed the movements, the first bite, over and over again. The last thing was the most disturbing. An interview like the ones influencers do on the street, with a lapel microphone. They asked a man what he thought of local cuisine, making direct reference to the tamale torta he was eating. The guy only managed to say delicious, because they caught him right as he was taking a bite. Before they cut the shot, the camera zoomed in, a frame that left you frozen. The man's mouth chewing the food. Then fade to black, and then the recipe appeared. By the way, the meat was frozen meat from back then too. Then a bunch of credits appeared. This wasn't a report, wasn't a testimony, wasn't an artistic essay. It was a video of the process of a recipe, a cooking recipe. Now leave your like. I stayed several minutes staring at the ceiling, disturbed to the point of nausea. I had gotten hungry, but also disgusted. My mouth watered when I saw the warm bread rolls wrapped in napkins next to the tamale steamer, and at the same time, I felt my stomach churn. It was a strange contradiction. I do consume this type of food, especially on weekends. A torta and a drink in the morning. I don't know at what moment the player jumped to the next file from the other folder. I didn't notice until the title appeared in white letters on a black background. As soon as I read the name, I knew what it was about: urban exploration. Visiting abandoned places at night. The video begins and a kid appears, maybe 19 years old. He's recording himself alone in his room. You can't make out the exact date, but from the video quality and how everything looks, you can calculate it could have been recorded between 2015 and 2020. He's one of those YouTubers who are just starting out, new channel, few followers. You can tell from everything: the room, the nervous tone he speaks with, the way he looks at the camera. In fact, I was just thinking that when the kid said it himself. He thanked his 100 subscribers, and to celebrate, he was going to do a challenge that, according to him, had been requested in the comments: to go record at an abandoned cemetery. He referenced a previous video that had reached 600 views. Maybe that's where the idea came from. Maybe he liked the morbid fascination. You know how people are on social media. The entire recording was handheld camera, phone in hand, really. You could tell he was one of those who records everything improvised. It was nighttime. The kid was walking. It wasn't clear if he lived nearby or if he had to travel to a distant place. Suddenly, there was a cut in the video. Then he appeared in front of the gates of a cemetery in Queens. He tried to get in through the main entrance, and that's where his plan failed. They caught him. You could clearly see in the shot that the police officer was scolding him, but of course, that also serves as content. Playing the rebel, the one who goes where he shouldn't, all that helps with views. Of course, he documents even the arrest. The video continues the next day. Now the kid was in his room again, telling what happened and that he wasn't going to give up. Now he was going to go to another cemetery, but he had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to try to enter through the door. He was going to look for a way to jump over. When he finally managed to get in, you couldn't see anything. The camera barely showed total darkness. The kid was trying to turn on the flashlight he brought, but it wouldn't turn on. The cell phone light didn't help much either. It barely illuminated a couple of steps forward. You could tell his desperation, because if he couldn't see anything, the camera could see even less. And a video in black doesn't work for the channel. At one point, the flashlight finally turned on. You could hear the kid breathing deeply, as if he were slowly releasing the air he'd been holding for minutes. Then he started walking, and I went with him, accompanying him, seeing what he saw or thinking I saw. He started walking among the headstones. The camera shook because he held the phone in his hand with the flashlight on. Everything looked opaque, humid. The vapor from his breathing fogged the shot a bit. He was narrating in a low voice so you could hear more of the atmosphere. He said it smelled weird. He couldn't explain what, but it was a heavy smell. Not old flowers or earth, something denser. He passed through a narrow passage between tall tombs. The flashlight could barely illuminate some names carved in stained marble. You could hear the sound of his footsteps on wet earth and fallen leaves. Then a strange sound, like a little metallic tap. He stopped. He turned the camera to one side, but nothing was seen. The curious thing was that the flashlight, which until then had been stable, started to flicker very slightly. It didn't turn off, but it fluctuated, as if something was interfering with it. The kid tried to ignore it, kept narrating. You could tell his voice was a bit more forced. The body betrays you even when you want to sound brave. He turned around on a wider path. There the shot stayed fixed for a second. In the background, between two crypts, you could make out what seemed to be a thin figure, almost pressed against a wall. It moved. You couldn't distinguish well if it was someone or not, because the light barely grazed it. The kid didn't manage to see it. He kept talking about how he didn't feel comfortable, that there was something strange in the atmosphere. When he turned the camera back toward the path he came from, the figure was no longer there. That's when he realized something didn't add up. He stayed quiet for a few seconds. The silence in the video was heavy. You could only hear his breathing and the muffled flickering of the flashlight. Then a low murmur, like a whisper. It didn't seem like a human voice. It wasn't words, it was an unintelligible murmur without rhythm. The kid took 2 steps back. For the first time in the video, you could hear genuine fear. He wasn't acting, wasn't saying anything, just breathing hard. He turned around quickly, and as he did, the flashlight pointed sideways at a very close headstone. On the stone, humidity had drawn a mark that looked like an elongated face, some dark stains that looked like eyes. He barely noticed, but didn't comment on anything. He turned again and started walking faster. The flashlight went out completely. The video went black for a few seconds. You could only hear breathing and the crunch of hurried footsteps. He turned on the light after trying several times with desperation, and suddenly the niches appeared illuminated. It was a white wall full of deep rectangles, hollow spaces, extending 6 feet deep. That's where they also keep remains. The contrast was brutal. All that wall like an empty hive against the darkness that had been showing in the video. That part of the cemetery was very neglected, you could tell. There was accumulated trash, remains of rotten flowers, broken niches, others open with boxes eaten away by humidity. Very few seemed to have maintenance or receive any visits. The kid hesitated. He didn't say it, the camera didn't capture it directly, but you could understand as soon as you saw him. He was thinking about getting into one of those niches to prove he was really brave. First he stretched his arm, pushed the camera as far as he could into one. The image shook and was somewhat off-center. Then he started climbing, using the holes of the lower niches as improvised steps. You could hear him panting. He scraped himself, cursed quietly, but finally got in. The video showed the interior. It was a deep stone coffin. The walls dripped with humidity, and you could see thick cobwebs in the corners. The air was dense. You could almost smell it through the screen. The kid put the camera at a more or less stable angle. He started talking. His voice was agitated, not clear if from the effort or because fear had already gotten to him. Maybe both. At one point, something interrupted the narration. He said he felt something on his back. He put his arm behind him, feeling around. When he pulled it out, he had a tangle of dark hair still stuck to a piece of something sticky that glistened with humidity. He tried to throw it away, but that thing got tangled between his fingers. He shook it off, tried to remove it, but the material seemed to have a viscous texture. He threw it, but it immediately bounced back in his face. The image froze for a few seconds at the worst moment. The young man had remains stuck to his mouth. They looked like pieces of pressed chicharron, greasy, stuck to his lips. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said it all. Time to leave, he surely thought, but it wasn't. It would never be again. When he tried to get out, he discovered that someone or something had blocked the opening of the niche. You couldn't see who or when, just that there was no longer an exit. The kid started kicking. You could hear muffled thuds. He screamed, asked for help. The camera kept recording for 2 complete minutes. The video showed his desperation screams that became increasingly broken until he couldn't hold it anymore and started crying. The crying was like that of a trapped child. After those 2 minutes, the video went to fast forward. The kid's body shook, thrashed, kicked. His hands clawed at the stone. His breathing became weaker. Suddenly, the video cut off. There were about 10 seconds of black screen. Then the image returned. Now someone else was holding the camera. It wasn't the kid. It was daytime. The shot was stable. The camera showed the exterior of the niches. The one the young man had chosen was open again. From outside, you could make out his sneakers. His feet weren't moving. Surely the inevitable happened. He died trapped. He died of desperation. The new camera operator seemed to have connected the device to power, because he positioned it inside the niche again and activated a time-lapse shot. You saw the body's decomposition process documented over what must have been about 4 months. First, the skin withered, sticking to the bones. The clothes discolored and tore before the tissues sank. The skull turned toward the camera too late for post-mortem movements. A horrible and terrifying scene. In the end, only dry and fragile bones remained. The shot faded to black. What was shown next was someone filling a small urn with ashes. They placed a label with the kid's name. You could make out Ryan or maybe Hugo. He had said it at the beginning of the video. The person recording attached a USB drive to the urn with black tape. Then, they put everything in a gift bag with shiny paper and got in a car. The camera took us through all of Brooklyn to the area where the circus used to set up. They arrived at a house, left the package on the ground, rang the doorbell. The next shot was distant, recorded from the street. An older man came out of the house, looked at the package, picked it up, went in, closed the door. It was the kid's dad. The last part of the video is a distant shot inside the cemetery, pointing to the same niche. In the distance, you could see a man and woman, very serious, placing flowers in a metal vase fixed to the wall right next to where the kid rests. After the last shot in the cemetery, the screen goes black. You hear the YouTuber's voice a fragment rescued from the beginning of his video, distorted. Thanks for the 100 subscribers. This is just beginning. Urbex. When the video ended, I stayed a good while staring at the black screen. I couldn't even move the mouse. It was as if my body knew I had already seen too much, but my head couldn't finish understanding what had just happened. I shouldn't be seeing this. This wasn't for me. Who would have paid to see these things? Who would sit calmly with all the time in the world to watch this? Besides me, of course. These types of videos aren't filmed for art. They're filmed for someone. For a viewer who is very far from the camera, but who knows perfectly well what they're seeing. I'm not that viewer. I shouldn't be. And yet there I was, with another folder right below. You know how heartbreak makes you do crazy things. A new haircut helps a little, traveling helps a lot more, but moving somewhere completely foreign. That's what saved me, or at least distracted me enough to survive. When things ended with Sarah, I shaved my head, got some tattoos, sold the stuff she'd left behind in my apartment, and bought a one-way ticket to London. It was the first place that came to mind. I'd never left the country before, never even thought about it, but I desperately needed to be far away from everything. I didn't have much money. I wasn't going as a tourist, but prepared to spend nights on the street or in 24-hour diners, sometimes hungry, sometimes not knowing where I'd sleep the next day. I won't bore you with the whole story, but eventually I made it to England and decided, this is where I'm staying. The first thing I did was look for work. I figured, what job would require the least communication while I learned some English? Delivery driver. I'd only need addresses, how much to charge, and how much change to give. Just good night and thank you, that's it. My first job was on the outskirts of London at a local pizzeria. Compared to the weather back home, the cold here was unbearable. Well, not really once you get used to it. The sky was always completely covered with an even gray that looked like a heavy lid over the city. The pizzeria was a nice place, well maintained inside and out, with warm lamps in the windows and the smell of fresh-baked dough wafting through the door. On weekends, they closed a little after midnight. During those hours, the owners paid me a bit more, so I was happy to make deliveries. One night I had to deliver a single pizza to an area where all the houses were identical. One main entrance, 4 apartments per house, 2 downstairs and 2 upstairs. The guy who ordered spoke on the phone, not through the app. He gave me precise instructions. Look for a key under one of the trash cans, enter the house, walk down a hallway, go upstairs, and knock on apartment number 4. I did it, though not very confidently. I'd heard ugly stories about delivery drivers who ended up in trouble just for walking through the wrong door. One misunderstanding was enough to get the police called on them, and being undocumented, I had no margin for error. I made sure everything looked clear. I left the motorcycle somewhere visible with my delivery bag properly displayed, like saying, I'm working. I found the key, opened the door, but since it had one of those automatic locks that pushes itself shut, I couldn't leave it cracked open. I ended up putting the key in my pants pocket. I had the pizza in my hand and couldn't maneuver well. I went up to number 4, rang the bell, then knocked on the door. The hallway had dim lighting, and the apartment was completely dark. This immediately caught my attention. I checked the receipt to see if I'd gotten the wrong number. It was the right one. I knocked again and waited 2 minutes. I told myself no more. The feeling that place gave me was one of abandonment, no music, no television, no footsteps. 2 minutes passed, and I started walking back toward the stairs. I was just about to go down the first step when I heard a door open behind me. I turned around, and it was number 4. The door was open, but I couldn't see anyone. I walked back a couple of steps, but stopped. No light came out. It was still as dark as before. Then I saw an arm reach out and make a gesture with its fingers, like someone calling to another person without rushing them, palm down, moving the fingers inward slowly. I approached carefully. A face barely peeked out from the shadows and said something in a low voice that I didn't understand. But from the tone and contained laughter, it seemed like they'd made a joke. Just then, a noise came from downstairs. It sounded like someone had just entered through the main door. From the atmosphere and tension, I understood what was happening without anyone explaining it to me. They were waiting for someone who didn't know there were people in their apartment. The person who ordered the pizza took my arm gently but firmly, and with a SHH asked me not to make noise. They pulled me into the apartment and closed the door. Everything went completely dark. I was tense, but almost immediately I heard them say the birthday girl was coming, which is why the lights were off. Surprise party. It made sense. If she saw me in the hallway, she'd immediately suspect something. I positioned myself in some corner without seeing well where. When the door closed, the darkness was total, not a crack of light, nothing. Behind me, I could hear nervous breathing. I was the same way. Even though I wasn't even part of the celebration, I felt like I shouldn't be there. The breathing gradually calmed down until it stopped, and then silence. But not just any silence, real silence. That kind of silence you don't hear even when people are normally quiet. There's usually something, movement of shoes, someone clearing their throat, the creak of a jacket, a sigh, the slight sound of someone crossing their arms. Here, nothing could be heard. I started getting more nervous when I realized a minute had passed and absolutely nothing was happening. No one was coming in, no one was talking, no one was moving. I felt a tremendous urge to leave, but I didn't want to say anything, didn't want to ask out loud. By this point, I no longer believed I was going to ruin a surprise. I went from thinking I was at a party where everyone waits quietly in silence with lights off, waiting for the birthday person to arrive so they could surprise them, to feeling like I was in something much stranger. I took out my phone and turned up the screen brightness. No one said anything to me, and it wasn't out of respect. It was because there was no one there. I was alone. The apartment was completely empty, not a single person. I dropped the pizza without thinking, walked quickly to the door, opened it, and ran downstairs, obviously very scared. Outside, I stopped for a few seconds to catch my breath, then got on the motorcycle and left straight from there. When I got to the pizzeria, the place was already closed, but I still went to tell the owners what had happened. No one said anything strange to me, they just listened. I walked home. I needed to walk to get rid of the knot in my throat, like something had gotten stuck there since I was inside that place. Halfway home, I put my hand in my pants pocket. The key to that house was still there. 1 or 2 weekends later, I told the other delivery driver about it. The first thing he asked me was if I remembered the address. He said the exact same thing had happened to a cousin of his, exactly the same. I can't assure you that we verified the address, but then, jokingly, my coworker said something that left me thinking. If you ever want to go back and investigate, my cousin still has the key to that apartment. I'm on all the delivery platforms, and I've maintained a 4.95 star rating because I'm fast, courteous, and extremely friendly. I'm not saying this to brag, but in this job, being efficient and staying out of trouble is what keeps you in the game. I listen to your stories when I'm waiting for an alert to come in. My coworkers do too. Sometimes we put them on a portable speaker in a corner where the crew gathers to eat tacos between orders. I don't see much talk about this topic on social media. It's like people only want the warm food bag placed in their hands. Without thinking about everything we go through from point A to point B. But you'd be surprised to know everything we encounter on the street, what we hear without meaning to, what we catch glimpses of inside people's houses, what sticks to our skin from riding around at night in this city. Anyway, there are so many things I could put together a whole compilation. But what I'm going to tell you started weird and ended worse. It was around 11:30 at night on a Friday. I think it's not necessary to tell you what days and what hours have the most orders. That day and that time were peak hours. And to top it off, there happened to be an event on the app. We call them events because nobody misses out. We all go at it hard to reach the bonus. The app can reward you with an extra $100, $300, $600, depending on the number of deliveries completed in a certain time. I was hunting for my second to last delivery. 2 more and I could go home and rest. I was crossing my fingers that it would be a short route. That day, I dropped my hoodie in the street and had been cold all afternoon. The alert sounded 4 kilometers. The first thing I thought about was gas, if it's enough, I told myself, and I accepted. I went to the restaurant Casa Miguel, which by the way is one of my favorites to pick up from. They hand you the food in seconds, no hassles, no waiting. I have to give them credit for that. I left with the bag tied up, tucked in the thermal backpack, and took off. Imagine for a moment how the delivery driver goes between half-empty avenues, with traffic lights that seem eternal on red even when there are no cars, with tires splashing stagnant water, with bus stop ads with brightness at maximum. At that hour, the city doesn't sleep, but it does seem to breathe differently, like it's tired of living. You pass by posts that barely light up, weird people walking alone, the occasional parked car with lights off, and someone inside still. The street is another world at those hours. At first, I didn't understand the irony or how weird it was, but something made me uncomfortable. I arrived at the delivery point and was surprised not to see the building number. I got off, walked a bit, and confirmed I was at another branch of the same restaurant I'd picked up the order from. Another Casa Miguel. It felt strange. I can't say exactly why, obviously because I went from Casa Miguel to Casa Miguel. I didn't want to think it was a prank. I know there are bored people with money who have the time and mentality to waste other people's time, but why do that? Wouldn't it have been easier to order from this location? I entered the order chat and messaged the customer, telling them I was downstairs ready to deliver. The response was immediate. Didn't take even 2 seconds, like they were already writing to me before I sent the message. Like they knew exactly when I was going to arrive, or like they were watching me. They replied that I should leave the food in a planter that was right outside a building. They gave me the details. It was the big planter, the one with a low fence right next to a stone bench. Leave it there. I walked to the planter and left the bag there. I turned toward the building looking for some face behind the windows, some sign that the customer was coming for their order. Nothing. Silence, darkness, closed blinds. I thought maybe they'd gotten the wrong location, or maybe the order came from someone who didn't want to be seen. Anyway, I stayed there for a moment waiting for confirmation, and then the phone rang. The customer or whoever was behind the order thanked me, said they had already seen the package, that they were near a car and would immediately come out for the food. At the same time, the lights of a vehicle parked about 10 steps away turned on, like saying, "Here I am, it's me." It was a white Chevy Malibu, maybe from 2015. On the app screen, the customer kept writing the 3 dots that appear before the message. They said for me to go back, that they'd left a tip, and thanks again. The interaction seemed strange to me. It felt impersonal, not like someone who felt like having a burrito and thanks you with emojis, but more like someone following a protocol, or worse, someone conducting an experiment. I walked back, but not with the same ease. I started feeling that discomfort of knowing someone is watching or recording you. Right there, next to where I'd left the bag, which by the way was no longer there, I found the tip. A small tower of coins, all quarters, $70. The way they were placed gave me a bad feeling. Before completing the delivery, I wrote in the app, "Thanks and good night." I turned around to go back to where I'd left the motorcycle and found a restaurant employee waiting for me on the sidewalk. She stared at me like she knew me. Maybe she confused me with another delivery driver, or maybe not. The girl was looking toward the planter. As I said, the food was no longer there. "It's from the car, that car," she said, pointing without shame at the white Malibu. She clarified that they always ordered food and always requested that it be left in the planter. They didn't come out, didn't talk, didn't show their faces. It was their dynamic. Then the high beams of the Malibu turned on. It felt like whoever was inside was greeting us. The girl threw out a weird phrase, like someone venting, without expecting a response. "It's the first time this happens to you, right?" "What happens to me?" I replied, already half tired of so much mystery. "A weird delivery." She stayed quiet, then before leaving, she told me, "When you leave, pass by the side of the car. Look inside at the driver's seat." I laughed nervously. I thought she was also part of the prank, or that among employees they passed the word to scare the new guys. I said goodbye, got on the motorcycle, and left slowly. I crossed by the planter, approached the Malibu. I had no intention of looking brazenly inside. I didn't want to seem like a thief. But when I saw what was inside, I stopped. Rather, what wasn't there. There was no one in the car. I got a little closer. I don't recommend it, but I did it on impulse, out of curiosity, because of that uncomfortable feeling that something doesn't add up. And there, on the passenger seat, was the food bag, the one I had just delivered, closed just like before. It wasn't scary yet. Not yet. It was really one of those things that throws you off, but you don't know if it's worth dwelling on. I got on the motorcycle and was about to start, still hoping to catch my last delivery. And at that moment, the Malibu started its engine. I clearly saw that there was no one inside. No door opened, there was no movement, just the engine starting like the car had its own will. It pulled into the street and left, turning calmly like any other car. I stayed there with my helmet half on. I couldn't help feeling that something had stepped outside of logic, but nothing else happened. The car left, no one rode again, the conversation closed by itself. I completed the delivery, marked it as finished, and went to look for the last one for the bonus. And there was no chase, nothing appeared to me, no one got out of the car, no one spoke to me again. But since then, every time I pass through that area, I remember. Sometimes the white Malibu is parked next to the planter, and sometimes it's not. Always empty, that's for sure. When I see that car, I always start thinking about what happened to me. I think I'll never get it out of my head because nothing I just told you has an explanation. Why would they order food from a distant restaurant if they have exactly the same 1/2 a block away? But above all, $70 was too much of a tip. I started working delivering food on a motorcycle right after I got fired from the call center. It was in 2020 when the pandemic was at its weirdest point. I'd never seen streets so empty, so much silence at dawn. I was broke. A buddy sold me his beat-up scooter, an old Vespa that shook more than California during an earthquake, but it ran. It fed me for several months. I liked working nights because there's less traffic and fewer excuses to talk to people. You just pick up, deliver, and that's it. The pandemic's effects on people's social lives had the city in a coma state. At night, it felt like the city was another world. It was mid-year, right after a spike in infections. I remember that, as strange as it sounds, I was a little more optimistic. It wasn't that the virus had stopped being scary, but it no longer paralyzed me. I was more focused on mastering the fear of dying and leaving my mom alone, because if something happened to me, who was going to pay the gas, the medicine, the bills? I don't have siblings, it's just her and me. I'm telling you this so you understand how my head was at that moment. I wasn't brave, I had just resigned myself. It's a given that when it starts raining, orders go up. It makes sense if you have the money. You pay someone else to get soaked, cross flooded avenues, and dodge buses with busted headlights so you can have dinner without getting your socks wet. That's how this city works. Since 3 in the afternoon, it had been drizzling lightly, like a threat. By 6, the real storm hit. The sky turned a dirty yellow and the water came down hard. You could barely see beyond a block, like we were inside a dirty fishbowl. Even so, orders kept falling on the app. Nobody cares if the freeway is closed or if there's a tree down on Division Street. They just want their sushi, their burger, their hot dinner. It took me about an hour and 10 minutes to get to one of those subdivisions where the security guards treat you like you're an intruder. I went upstairs, took an elevator, walked down a very long hallway, waited outside a door. And when the lady finally opened up, she didn't even let me speak. She told me she didn't want anything anymore, that I was incompetent, that she was going to report me. She went back inside and slammed the door in my face. Honestly, I wasn't even angry anymore. You know that in these situations people think you're part of the same automated app system. One more click. I suppose headquarters knows this happens when it rains, but they still blocked me, left me out without being able to accept more orders. The only thing I had left was the food they didn't want to receive, and although it sounded miserable, I took it as a gift. I would never have ordered $16 worth from that restaurant, but when I opened the bags, it wasn't what I imagined. Everything came soggy, poorly sealed, like it had been shaken. There was sauce smeared on the napkins, rice stuck to the dessert lid. The sushi was already warm. The smell was weird. I sat in a planter that was darkened by the shadow of a tree, right in front of a newspaper stand closed with chains, and there I started eating. I had no other choice. I was going at it with appetite, understanding that I'd earned this with sweat, when suddenly I saw something move on the ground, like a shadow dragging itself. I stopped cold with chopsticks halfway to my mouth. I searched with my eyes among the dripping branches, among the puddles. Maybe it was a rat, but not just any rat. It was a big thing, bigger than a dog. I thought about getting up, but I told myself, no way, this is the city. There's no corner where you won't run into something. Even so, I stayed tense for a few seconds, and then I jumped. A presence gave me such a fright, accompanied by that cold sweat where you can't even scream. There was a man standing next to me. I didn't see him arrive, he was just there, like he'd come out from between the plants or down from some roof. He had grayish skin like he was sick, and lost eyes, though not hostile. He didn't ask me for food or speak to me, but I offered him some by reflex, out of pity, or because of that impulse that comes out when someone looks so broken they don't even resemble a complete person anymore. I handed him one of the still-sealed packages, one that hadn't been shaken. He fumbled with hands that looked strange, like it was hard for him to coordinate his fingers. I opened it for him myself without saying anything, and he sat next to me like we were sharing a family dinner. I went back to my food, turning my back to him just a little, but moments later I noticed something didn't fit. Something weird. I could hear him chewing, but not like people chew. He didn't swallow quickly or hungrily. He chewed slowly, but with strange movements, like each bite took effort to position in his mouth. And then I saw him out of the corner of my eye. His jaw was loose, dislocated, like hanging to one side. It moved by itself like he had no control, and his teeth, though small, were sharp. They looked filed, pointed, like a shark's. But that wasn't the ugliest part. I noticed his ankles. They were bent, twisted, completely doubled over like they'd been broken years ago and never healed. Even so, all his weight rested there, like it didn't hurt, like he couldn't feel it. When he noticed I was looking at him, he looked down at his feet, like recognizing he'd forgotten something. Then he made a kind of effort, like to disguise it. He adjusted himself, turned his ankles, and placed the soles of his feet on the ground like he wanted to seem normal. I couldn't help my curiosity. I asked him if he was okay, if that didn't hurt, and then the guy responded to me, but not with words. First, he dislocated his shoulders, let them fall like they were made of cloth, both arms hanging uselessly. Then he tilted his head, cracked his neck, and let it hang to one side like he was a doll whose pieces were coming loose. His face hung at stomach height and swayed from side to side like a sign beaten by the wind. The neck was no longer a neck. It was a flaccid flap that barely held the skull. With God's forgiveness, but that did turn my stomach. I felt an emptiness in my chest like the blood had gone to my feet. I got up suddenly and walked straight to the motorcycle with the firm intention of getting out of there. I heard him adjust himself like his bones were puzzle pieces. I felt his gaze on my back. I stopped, turned around. He already had his head properly placed and his shoulders firm. He was looking at me intensely. His eyes were completely black with no trace of pupils. And then I saw something impossible. For a few seconds, his eyelids closed vertically like he was a lizard. That's when I understood about the hands, why he couldn't open the package. They weren't human hands. They had another structure, another texture, like they were wet, like they were part of an adapted animal. I was about to start the motorcycle when I heard him. With a voice that didn't sound like a voice, but like a poorly calibrated device, he said, "Don't be scared. Thanks for the food." And then, in front of me, his whole body disarticulated again. He folded like a marionette without strings and dragged himself toward an uncovered storm drain, one of those rusty storm mouths at sidewalk level. I watched him go in like I was watching a science fiction movie. I didn't run, didn't scream. I just observed with my knuckles frozen against the handlebars. I looked around, not a soul, not a car, not a dog, no one who could corroborate my story. That being was leaving, but he didn't disappear suddenly. He took his time. His long, skinny body struggled to get through the grate. You could tell he'd done it before he knew it. He lived down there. When his torso and legs finally disappeared, I stood there motionless. And then the last thing happened. One of his hands emerged again. It was longer than I remembered, with slightly translucent skin on the fingers. He was carrying something shiny. He left it carefully on the pavement, like someone leaving a tip, and left. I stared at that object without approaching for 2-3 minutes, maybe more. My appetite no longer existed. I felt my tongue dry. I approached carefully. It was a flower, a golden, metallic flower with perfectly carved petals. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. You could tell it was worth something from the first second. I took it home, cleaned it with an old rag, and as soon as I removed the mud, it shone. It was gold, fine gold, not plated, not fake, pure. 3 days later, I took it to a man who appraises jewelry downtown. He told me that for the goldsmith work and the weight of the metal, it wasn't worth less than $200,000. I still have it. I never sold it. I don't know if it gives me fear or respect, but I feel like the flower is unique. Since then, I haven't lacked work. I have 2 cars. I drive one. My cousin has the other. I haven't done badly. Honestly, I feel grateful to the creature, to that reptile man. I think that night the food was delivered to the right hands. Sometimes when it rains very hard, I stop in front of storm drains, like waiting to see him again. Rather, like something from down there is watching me. I was 14 years old when it happened, back in 1998. We still lived in the last days of heavy televisions, static-filled radios, noisy typewriters, and rotary phones mounted on kitchen walls. My dad owned a small print shop near the industrial district, about a 15-minute walk from our house toward the metro station. It was a narrow space with damp walls, cold concrete floors, and a single yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling. The place always smelled of dirty turpentine and old ink. The tables were heavy wood, the same ones from when he first started the business, and there was always something dripping or drying somewhere. Sometimes the old fan would spin with a screech that sounded like a lament. That noise would stick in your ears long after you left. I think this is what I inherited from my dad, being one of those people who work better when the rest of the world has gone to sleep. He had his rhythm, printing through the early morning hours. Sometimes I'd join him on Friday or Saturday nights when I didn't have to get up early for school. My dad moved slower when he drank. He'd get talkative, turn the radio down low, and fall asleep with his shoes still on. He always left the fan running and the radio on, tuned to one of those stations that played Mexican music all night long. That night was no different. My dad fell asleep in his chair with his head hanging back and his mouth open. I had gotten into the habit of helping him lie down on the floor, taking off his shoes, and settling myself under one of the tables on an old mat. But that time, I don't know why, I wasn't sleepy. So before lying down, I started fixing the chain on my bicycle. The radio suddenly began crackling. You know that sound when it can't pick up the signal properly. That choppy static that sometimes mixes with distant voices. I walked over to turn it off. I never liked the music my dad played. The radio was one of those square, dirty white boxes that looked like small ovens. It had 2 identical knobs, one for volume, the other for tuning. Sometimes you'd mix them up. To turn it off, you had to turn the volume all the way down, and on the last turn, it would make a click. That's what I did, but I accidentally tuned into something else. Finally, a radio listener. I let go of the knob. The voice disappeared instantly. I stood there frozen, not because I was scared, but because it had caught me off guard, like someone had whispered right in my ear inside the shop. I turned the knob again, more carefully this time, millimeter by millimeter. Those kinds of stations don't take up much of the spectrum. It was just a thin line on the dial, as if someone had hidden it there on purpose. There it was again, and here's our only radio listener again. Welcome back, Robert. It said my name. My name is Robert, and the radio was talking to me. I got chills, not from fear, but from that feeling you get when something isn't right, but you don't know exactly what. I wanted to turn it off, but I also felt like if I did, something would break. Like it would be rude to hang up on someone who was speaking to you so clearly. I glanced at my dad. He was snoring hard with his eyes half open. Apart from the fan, the rest of the shop was quiet, but not peacefully quiet. It felt heavy. And then the voice spoke again. Do you want me to tell you the story of the girl in the chamber? Do you want me to tell you the story of the girl in the chamber, Robert? Do you want me to tell you the story of the girl in the chamber? The third time it said it, I felt like someone had whispered my name in my ear. The hair on my neck stood up. Yes, I said, almost without thinking. The static hum quieted down. Then soft music began, a slow melody in the background, like the kind they used to set the mood for old radio dramas. And then the narration began in the same voice. The story begins in this very building, long before it was a print shop. Long before the metro existed or the industrial district was built. When houses had tin roofs and bedrooms were poorly made brick rooms. It paused briefly, then continued. In those days, a girl lived here. No one remembers her name anymore, though some say she was called Lucy. She was restless, talked back, threw tantrums, but not like a normal child. Someone locked her up, but it wasn't her parents or her siblings. She disappeared one afternoon, and no matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find her. That night she screamed, pounded on the walls, begged to be let out. But no one heard her. Do you know why, Robert? The humming returned for a second, then the voice continued. No one heard her because there was a fan running, an old, huge fan with metal blades. It was right outside the chamber, pointing toward the hallway, and the noise covered everything. When they finally turned it off, it was too late. Too late. I stood there paralyzed, my hand on the radio. For a moment I thought it was over, but the voice returned. Do you want to see where the girl rests now, Robert? I didn't answer. I stayed still, but as if I had answered out loud, the voice continued. She's here in the shop. The chamber is still here. There's a door, but it's hidden. Move the shelf. There's a board nailed to the wall. It has a hidden hinge. Use a putty knife. Push it from below. My throat went dry. I turned slowly. In the corner of the shop, where I rarely went, was the shelf the radio had mentioned. The voice was no longer speaking, just that unsettling background music. I got up and went over there. I pulled out the shelf with effort. Behind it was the old board with rusty nails half pulled out. It was true, at the bottom, there was a groove. I slipped a putty knife between the wood and the wall, and the door opened. Warm air, as if it had been trapped for years, blew on my face. Inside there was no light, just the thick darkness of something that shouldn't be opened. Then the radio sounded again from the other side of the shop. She's still there, Robert, waiting for someone to look at her. You just have to go in. I nearly jumped backward. Yes, there was a girl, or well, something. Sitting on a small wooden chair, covered in dust and cobwebs, was a doll. An old doll with its head tilted and tangled hair, so dirty you could barely see its eyes. The faded pink dress looked like it had been hand-sewn many years ago. The chamber was like a tiny bedroom. The walls were painted pink, though peeling from humidity. It had a small vanity with a broken mirror, and on the shelves, lined up with precision, were about 10 more dolls. Barbie dolls. I closed the door quietly. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't understand why it was there, or who had set it up like a diorama or theatrical set. I didn't understand why the voice on the radio had sent me there, or how it knew I would find that. Then I remembered the fan. That old fan that squealed when it spun, the one the voice had mentioned. I went and turned it off. As soon as I did, my dad woke up suddenly, half disoriented. He sat up and asked me in a hoarse voice, "Why did you turn it off?" I told him it wasn't hot, that there was no point in keeping it on. Drowsily, he looked at me for a moment, as if he was thinking about what to say. Then he said very quietly, "Because when we turn it off, we can hear the screams." "What screams?" "Behind that wall." He pointed with his chin toward the chamber. He lay back down without saying anything else, closed his eyes, and went back to sleep. Martin was a friend of my uncle's from high school. All 3 of them graduated together, but only my uncle's continued to college. Martin went to the United States. He had family in New Jersey who took him in. That was in 1996. There he got a job at Best Buy, a huge electronics store with aisles of stereos, VCRs, speakers, monitors, and cameras. Electronics were always his thing. He had an impressive memory for understanding circuits, soldering, and frequencies. He was one of those guys who could open up a television, take out each piece, identify what was wrong, and put it back together like new. At the store, he did technical support, and in his free time, he repaired things on his own. He advertised his services on Craigslist, though he didn't have a physical workshop and worked out of his apartment. He talked to my uncles regularly, telling them he was doing well, that you could live there without so much pressure, that they should consider crossing over. There was plenty of work for people who knew how to do things right. One night around midnight, Martin was alone at home with a printer opened up on his table. He was replacing the feed motor on an old Epson, his last task before going to bed. Then the television turned on. He said it was one he had repaired days before, one of those big, square RCA models. He had left it plugged in because he couldn't find a fault that appeared randomly. He thought maybe with time it would manifest itself. It surprised him that it turned on by itself. No sound, just the screen full of static. He went for the remote control but couldn't find it anywhere. He didn't want to move the cabinet where it was connected either, because he had other equipment stacked on top. He figured he'd finish with the printer, and then just yank the plug from the wall. The static on the screen dissolved, as if someone was changing the channel from somewhere else. A set appeared in pastel colors, a plain, very bright background, an aesthetic similar to those 90s infomercials, like the ones that sold miracle knives or cleaners. In the middle of the set was a man standing completely still, looking toward the camera. Impeccably groomed, not saying a word. Martin stood there watching. He said it was like a museum installation, a recorded performance, something out of place for broadcast television. Just when he thought about turning it off, a message appeared in red letters. In addition to a warning to turn up the volume, a 3-minute countdown also appeared on the screen. Martin started looking more seriously for the remote. He checked under the table, between the cables, moved the printer. When he finally found it, the counter showed 30 seconds. It was supposed to start when it reached 0, so he turned up the volume and waited. The screen flickered. The message disappeared just as the timer reached 0. And then the video began. It was old material, recorded on tape. You could see the horizontal tracking lines, the faint color, the grainy sound. A narrator spoke in English, but the strange thing was that there were also subtitles in Spanish and French. The title appeared like a slide. What to do in case of tower collapse. Martin froze. The video started with calm music, like a school tutorial. A voice without accent, neutral, institutional, gave the welcome. This material is part of the Urban Contingency Program Level 3. Please pay attention to the instructions that could save your life. The first images were generic shots of offices, elevators, people walking through hallways in slow motion. It looked like an educational production from the 90s. Pastel background, formal clothing, a motionless narrator. Section 1. Risk identification. Modern modular structure buildings over 80 stories can represent a potential threat if their structural system is compromised by fire, impacts, or sabotage. The screen showed a computer model of a skyscraper, and then an airplane-like object hit it. Section 2. Signs prior to collapse. Gas leaks, irregular water pressure, constant vibration, changes in floor temperature, sharp metallic noises without apparent cause. Images of a secretary noticing that the sink water was hot. A glass falling from a table due to a barely perceptible vibration. People looking up as if something was about to happen. Section 3. Escape routes. Avoid elevators. Do not use central staircases. If you are between floors 70 and 90, your priority is to descend to core 2 or 3 of the building. A schematic plan appeared, like a security diagram with areas marked in red. It was too technical for something aimed at the public, but there it was, as if it were. Section 4. People trapped on upper levels. If you cannot descend, seek shelter in an internal office. Close windows, sealed doors with carpets and clothing. Use tape to seal cracks. A woman in a skirt and formal blouse poured water over her head, using what she got from the toilet tank. Her face showed no panic, only resignation. If there is extreme heat, use the tank water to cool your neck, forehead, wrists. It was chilling, the way they said it, the way they showed it. Section 5. Mental preparation. It is possible that you will not survive. Prepare to transmit your location. Use bright objects. Write your name and that of your loved ones on paper. If you are a believer, begin to pray. If you are not, breathe deeply. Think of a happy memory. Remain conscious as long as possible. The image returned to that woman in the office. She was writing something. The camera stayed with her too long. It seemed like a fiction scene, but without actors. Do not scream. Save oxygen. Section 6. Recommendations for rescuers. Avoid breathing dust directly. Use wet cloths. Structures may collapse again. Do not trust low ceilings. If you find bodies, check pulse before moving them. If you hear voices, do not respond immediately. Sometimes it is not a person. At the end, a message in red letters. This material is confidential. It should not be distributed without official authorization. Manhattan Response Program. Recording date, March 1993. Martin stood there in front of the screen, not knowing what to do. When the video ended, the screen went black. Then a message appeared. White text on a black background with simple typography. In the background, an instrumental recording of the United States anthem could be heard, barely audible, as if it were coming from another room. If you work near the following areas, consider staying home until further notice: Battery Park, Wall Street, Fulton Street, Liberty Avenue. Code UFR 0901. Present this code as justification at your workplace. Martin read it aloud. He didn't work in the towers, but he had training on Liberty Avenue, half a block from the World Trade Center. It was scheduled for the next day at 9 in the morning. The video cut off abruptly. The screen filled with color bars, the classic test pattern, a low hum and silence. Martin didn't know what to do. He put the remote control in a box, unplugged the television, closed the workshop door, but couldn't sleep. He felt a premonition that left him breathless, as if someone had secretly warned him that something irreversible was about to happen. He lay down with his clothes on, but didn't close his eyes. Sometimes a tear would escape without knowing why. He didn't go to the training or give notice. He stayed in front of the television, turned on with the volume low, waiting for something to appear. A notice, breaking news, an explosion in the sky. And then at 8:46 in the morning, the signal from the channel he was watching was interrupted. A nervous voice in English tried to stay calm. And there was the image of a tower wrapped in smoke, and a plane disappearing into the other one. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.